sound. Any sound on there? Yeah, I'm there. I could see you. I personally could see you. That woman there, I could see.
There's no volume.
I don't know. I've been asking this for a while. I turned it off, didn't I, at the bottom?
There's a note about transparency and accountability at the beginning of the agenda, which as no member of the public are actually present, I don't think I need to read out, but we've all read it and we all understand it, I'm sure. Can we have apologies for absence, please?
Apologies have been received from Councillors Cleary, Mackenzie, Mason, Thackeray and Hope. Councillor Dockerow will substitute for Councillor Cleary. Councillor Graham will substitute for Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Ryby will substitute for Councillor Thackeray, and there is no substitute for Councillors Mason and Hope.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Potter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have been lobbied on items 7, 10 and 13, all personal, non-pecuniary and non-prejudicial. Thank you.
Any more? Councillor Windress.
Thank you, Chair. Item 13, I've been lobbied personal, non-prejudicial, non-pecuniary. Thank you.
Yeah. And on item 9, I've been lobbied. Councillor Brockhouse, home.
Hi, Councillor Braxton.
Braxton, sorry. Braxton.
That's okay. I've also been lobbied on item 10, personal, non-pecuniary, non-prejudicial. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll go through the minutes. And I have one point to make on the minutes, which I'll make in a minute, but does anybody else want to make any other points at the moment? My one point is on minute number 24, which is the Butter, the Mill, Main Street, and Motherby. That was marked as deferred, and I understood it was deferred for further negotiation with the applicant, as well as for obtaining answers to questions. Is that members' recollection? Members who are here, that is.
Chairman, if it might assist, we have listened to the recording. We did have that discussion in the meeting about members submitting questions to officers and various things, and at the end of that debate I did say in the meeting that it would be better for the purposes of this discussion for this item just to be deferred, so that I wasn't in a sort of straitjacket for any discussions with any party. So the actual decision was deferred rather than any references to negotiations, questions or anything else. So just on a point of accuracy, Chairman, we have checked the recording.
I would say that it's my clear understanding that whatever was said, that there was going to be negotiation. But we'll let that go. Do we agree the minutes?
I'll propose
propose, Chairman.
I will second. Do we all agree?
I think there are only 5 members who were actually at that last meeting, Chairman, so whether we need to just quickly just go through the members who were here or take them as an affirmation.
Or can we just take it as an affirmation from the
Yeah.
members who are here?
Thank you.
That brings us, I think, to the schedule of items to be determined by the committee. And first of all, item 6. I think this is yours, Jill.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that. Yes, this item has been returned to the committee following the last meeting where members voted to refuse the application. Although at the time there were no considered or articulated reasons for refusal given. In response to that, the Head of Planning invoked effectively the cooling off period under the Constitution, which means that the application comes back for consideration at this meeting. An update report is on the agenda that's been prepared and has been designed to respond to concerns raised by members at the meeting. They included concerns about the environmental build standards of the proposed dwelling, the extent to which the approved access road had been used for its intended purpose, conflict with local policy and the role of the MPPF in the decision-making process, and the extent to which the proposal significantly enhances the setting, its immediate setting. Members will be aware that that is one of the tests of national policy. Chairman, there are a number of members here tonight that weren't at the last meeting, and whilst the original report, the main report, is on the agenda, I think it is appropriate that I do spend some time outlining the application. It is an application for a new house in the open countryside, and it's made under national policy, paragraph 80 now of national policy. That paragraph changed in the intervening period between the last meeting and this meeting as government made some changes to national policy. And effectively what that does is it provides a policy exception for isolated new homes in the countryside that are of an exceptional quality, of outstanding design. The extent to which the application satisfies the tests of national policy is therefore integral to the determination of this application. So the two tests as they now stand under paragraph 80 are, the first test is that a design has to be, or a scheme has to be truly outstanding, reflecting the highest standards of architecture and would help to raise the standard of design more generally in rural areas. And the second test reads, it would significantly enhance its immediate setting and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. So the main change to national policy, not only is the policy numbering, but some members will be aware that there was an innovation test. Proposals could be promoted on the basis that were innovative design. That's now being deleted, and so the design now can only be promoted on the basis that it's truly outstanding and reflects the highest standards of architecture. The proposal is a bold and strong contemporary design, and it's very much based on a modern interpretation of a farmstead or farmhouse in the rural landscape. includes a house and ancillary buildings as connected series of angular blocks with an abstract shape and form. There are areas of formal gardens are proposed immediately around the building group and the entrance courtyard. And the landscape design approach for the remainder of the site is very much based on sort of natural planting and the reinstatement of nature in effect. So the creation of hay meadows, additional woodland and hedge planting. Chairman, the update report and the previous main report fully consider the application against the tests of national policy. In terms of the first test, officers do think this is an outstanding design. It's imaginative, unique and creative, and is based on a strong concept that explains the thought processes behind the design and its aesthetic appearance, its shape, its form, its function. And it's a design which roots the building in its landscape setting. Its proportions, siting and arrangement are appropriate for the site's topography, existing features and existing sense of seclusion. And the proposed materials reinforce the bold design and provide a contemporary vernacular that, in officers' view, helps to connect the building to its local rural context. In terms of the second test, officers are of the view that the approach to landscape design, the reinstatement of landscape features, the increase in habitat and biodiversity, as well as the architectural merits associated with the house and buildings itself, are sufficient to meet that key element of that second test in terms of significantly enhancing the immediate setting. I think in addition, the scheme will also include the retention of landscape features, fields, hedges and woodland. And it also reflects the sort of scattered, isolated farmsteads in the locality. And in those respects, it's a scheme which does reflect, in my view, the characteristics of the local landscape. As expected by national policy, it's a proposal that's been through a rigorous design review process and through its evolution has responded to many of the recommendations made by the design review panel. It's a home that will be built to carbon zero standards and it can be accommodated without an unacceptable impact on the landscape, without impacting on the setting of heritage assets and without detriment to the amenity of neighbouring residents. I think if we could just go to the presentation, I've got quite a few photos that were shown at the last meeting, which I'll just quickly run through again. That's all right, Chairman. So that's the site there outlined in red. If you imagine Sheriff Hutton is it's off the Cornborough Road. If you imagine Sheriff Hutton is in the bottom sort of right hand corner. That will help you get your bearings. And the Sheriff Hutton solar farm is immediately south of the site. So the application area is the red area, although the building itself is in the lower southern part of the site. If you imagine that site divided in two on a sort of east-west axis, the building itself is in the lower part. The northern half of the site it will effectively be part of the landscaping proposals, so hay meadow and additional hedgerow and woodland planting. Could you just move on to the next picture, please? Thank you. This is the access to the site. This on the southern boundary of the site, looking directly north. You'll just see on the right-hand side of the screen the sort of raised mound, that hummock, which I believe is called Lamb Hill. I think that's how the site gets its name. The building itself will be orientated between sort of to the front of Lamb Hill, but at one side, to the left-hand side of it in the picture. And it's orientated on a sort of an east-west axis across the site. So from the bottom left-hand part of the hill across and in front of those three trees, but nevertheless on the horizon in this picture. Could just move on to the next picture. That again is taken from the southern boundary, looking directly north. You can see, I think you can just see in the screen, Cornborough Hall, which is a listed building, which is on the horizon and to the north of the site. I think there are a couple of fields that are intervening between the application site and Cornborough Hall itself. If you could just move on to the next slide, please. And that again is from the southern boundary, looking directly at Lamb Hill itself. And if you could just move on to the next slide. Thank you. This is taken from the sort of southeastern corner of the site. So you have Lamb Hill on the right-hand side, the access to the site on the left-hand side of the picture, and then you can just see where Lamb Hill sort of starts to dip down on the horizon there. That's and a sort of a little bit of almost like a clearing in the woodland. There is a pond there, and that's the sort of the broad alignment that the house will take. So with the house being located between sort of Lamb Hill and that stretch of woodland on the western boundary, the access road to the house itself, from the access point to the site, will come round this eastern edge and lead into a courtyard on the eastern side of the building group. What will happen with the rest of that site is effectively additional planting that's designed to give that existing planting less of a sort of a plantation-like feel and more of a sort of naturalistic planting, and the creation of hay meadows. What will be also planted is quite a strong hedgerow green corridor to the rear of the dwelling, so the other side of the dwelling, the northern side of the dwelling. I think in terms of you don't get a strong sense of it from the photographs, but from standing in that site, particularly the lower part of the site, it is very, very secluded. It doesn't feel like you're standing in a field that's surrounded by woodland. It feels like you're almost standing in a clearing, but you don't quite understand why you're in a clearing. And I think when I started to think about why I felt that the building enhanced its setting, it wasn't just about the architecture. I think it was, given the secluded nature of that setting, the building in that position actually gives the setting some purpose and the clearing some definition, which you don't really get. As I say, you feel like you're standing in a clearing, but you're not quite sure why. If you could just move on to the next picture, please. That's just another picture taken from the eastern boundary, looking in a sort of a northwesterly direction. You get a sense there that how the topography on the other side of Lamb Hill starts to dip away. The next picture, please. Again, another picture from the eastern boundary, looking north. So again, that's the section of the site that's beyond effectively where the building group will be, and the landscape design response there is effectively more hedgerow, reinforced hedgerow planting and hay meadow to replace the sort of intensive arable crop nature of the field as it exists. There'll also be the reinstatement of some historical planting on Lamb Hill itself. Scots pine, I think. We could just move on to the next picture. And this photograph is just taken from the top northeastern boundary of the site. You can see Cornborough Hall directly north. It is another access point to the site, or field access point to the site. Can we just take the next picture, please? And that picture is looking directly along the northern boundary in a westerly direction. Again, that would all be sort of hay meadow and reinforced hedgerow planting in terms of that view. Can we have a look at the next picture, please? And again, just another picture from the north boundary, looking south. And next picture, please. Yeah, and this again is from the northern boundary looking south, and you can just see Lamb Hill there to the left-hand side of the picture, where the land starts to dip away at the top of the field before the woodland. That's effectively where the house would be. It's the very highest point, the highest point of the roof of one element of the building group. I think it's about 8 metres high. in terms of how that relates to the height of Lamb Hill is effectively, I think it's about 4 metres, 4.4 metres above the top of the height of Lamb Hill. So you don't see the full extent or height of the northern elevation of the dwelling. It will sit below half of the dwelling, the first floor will sit below that level in the landscape. And just move on to the next picture, please. Again, that's just another photograph looking south from the northeastern side of the site. Next picture, please. Again, from the western side of the site, looking in a sort of southeasterly direction. Effectively, these photographs are taken walking round the site in a sort of anti-clockwise direction. Next photograph, please. This is looking from the western side of the site directly across to Lamb Hill. So that's broadly the sort of the east-west alignment of the dwelling on that lower portion of the site. And the next photograph, please. This is a pond on the western side of the site within the woodland. Again, you can see Lamb Hill in the distance, and again, that just tries to, it's there to give you an indication of effectively the alignment of the building group. It will sit between that pond and the front of Lamb Hill. And the next picture, please. It's just a photograph of the access to the site off the Cornborough Road. We have the next photograph, please. And this is a photograph just taken from a little bit further west along the Cornborough Road, looking across to the site. You see glimpses of the site through that field gate. The dwelling itself will sit well beyond and within the site on the other side of the trees that you can see just to the right of the picture there. Can I have the next picture, please? That again is just another picture taken from west of the site along the Cornborough Road. Again, the house was it would be the other side of that landscaped woodland. Next picture, please. This is just a couple of photographs that were taken in winter time, and I think what they do is just give you a sense of how extensive that the woodland is really in terms of the way it screens and encloses the lower portion of the site. Next picture, please. Just another one taken from the eastern side of the site, looking across to the pond. You can just see the snow on the ground is a little bit thicker in where the pond is between in that sort of little break in the woodland. And next picture, please. And these are just some images that have been prepared by the architect, just a sort of 3D images of the building group and its relationship to key features on the site. So you can see the access point there, the drive sweeping round the eastern side of the site, the building group located between Lamb Hill and the pond, and the reinstated planting on Lamb Hill there, just to the right of the picture. And the next one, please. That's just another illustration taken effectively from the north, looking down. And the next one, please. And another illustration looking from, I suppose, the looking eastwards down onto the building group. And the next picture, please. That's it. Thank you. Chairman, officers remain of the view that the proposal meets the highest standards of architecture and the requirements of national policy. This national policy exception is in place to continue the nation's tradition of building fine country houses. Traditional country houses are part of, and I've described it in the update report, a part of the DNA of Rydale, really. And as an authority to date, we have encouraged and embraced contemporary architecture as a way of taking this legacy forward into the future. In officers' view, this would be achieved by this scheme. And it's my view, my professional opinion, that this is one, if not perhaps the best that we've had to date. It is a scheme of exceptional design quality, and the recommendation, Chairman, remains one of approval. Thank you.
And just to come on to the other points in the report, this written report that's before us, Jill, we've agreed, haven't we, the main issue as far as members are concerned is a subjective judgment as to whether the building would substantially enhance its immediate setting and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. That's in effect the issue that is before us, is it not?
I think I think you're right. I think the nub of the issue is the extent to which the proposal meets the tests of national policy. It being a truly outstanding design, to paraphrase it, a truly outstanding design and enhancing the immediate setting of the building. It is a judgment. You're correct, Chairman.
Just before we proceed, Chairman, I noticed Councillor Ryby arrived at around about 16 minutes past 6, and I'm just conscious we're in this debate, and we haven't asked Councillor Ryby, if he's got any declarations to make for the meeting, but also to make the point that obviously Councillor Ryby arrived part way through this item already, so there is an issue there about participation in this item.
Well, yes, and I'll be guided by the legal advice as to whether or not Councillor Ryby, having come in through the item, is actually allowed to vote, or alternatively, whether, bearing in mind that he's had the written report and been able to read it, whether that entitles him to vote, because although he hasn't heard the officer's presentation, he hasn't yet been present for the debate. I will hear legal advice on that, I think.
Well, the first point, Chairman, is declarations. That's not legal advice territory, that's just... Thank you. And then I think we have a legal advisor on the phone, Kerry Dawson, I think it is.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. Essentially, it's a matter of whether or not the councillor has heard all the information before him in order to make a decision on that matter. Obviously, all members have to have regard to everything that is heard and said in relation to the application. Unfortunately, I am attending virtually, so I don't have the benefit of knowing precisely how much of the member has missed when he entered off that presentation, nor whether the member was present on the last occasion, in which case would have the benefit of some further knowledge on that application. But it is a matter for the member as to whether or not he feels that he has got all the information before him. If there is an element of doubt, obviously the safest matter to deal with that is not to take part in the proceedings for this particular item.
Thank you for that. I believe there is a speaker, a Josie Taylor. Is Josie Taylor there?
Yes.
Would you like to make your speech, please? You have only 3 minutes.
Certainly. Objector. As the case officer has not fully addressed the importance of isolation of the site in her additional, I will. Whether a development site is deemed isolated or not is a fundamental part of any Para 79, now 80, consideration. A Para 80 exemption from the local plan allowing building in the open countryside only applies if the site is judged to be isolated. As a local resident of Cornborough, I will explain why this site is not isolated. Please see the Google image before you. Far from being a loose cluster of farmhouses and associated land, as the case officer states, Cornborough is a settlement dating as far back as the 11th century. As you can see today, it is a modern, thriving community. Most buildings are homes or successful businesses. The site is an agricultural field in a rural setting, but it is not isolated. There are 6 dwellings sited within 350 metres or less from the site boundary. Next door to the west is a world-leading animal genetic company, and to the east a horse trainer and farmer. Opposite, there is an online retail business, a successful racehorse trainer, and a stage set manufacturer. To the north is a nationally respected ceremonial trumpet manufacturer, a marketing company, and a holiday let business. The controversial site access is directly opposite a solar farm and substation. The busy Cornborough Road passes along the site's southern boundary and directly past the site entrance. On the eastern boundary is a well-used track leading to Cornborough Grange, Cornborough Hall, and a holiday let. The track is also frequently used by agricultural vehicles managing the surrounding land and horses for Dudley Hill Racing, a horse breeding and racing business. As you can see, the proposed site is not in an isolated location, but is at the very heart of the vibrant settlement of Cornborough. The excessive focus in the officer's report on the subjective merits of the architectural design is irrelevant if the case for isolation is not proven. As this is not proven, then Para 80 in its entirety cannot be applied to this planning application. Therefore, this application must be refused as it is also contrary to SP1 and SP2 of the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have the agent, Mr. Richard Blencarn. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, members?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. Members, it is vital to note that this application is being brought to you under the guise of NPPF paragraph 80, as Jill explained, and it is against this policy that the scheme is being considered. Clearly, design can be a matter of subjective tastes, and members undoubtedly will have their own personal opinions about this. But to ensure that a scheme does meet the relevant tests, the scheme has been through 2 rigorous design reviews. It is actually a requirement of the national planning policy that local authorities should ensure that they have access to and make appropriate use of tools and processes for assessing and improving the design of development, which includes design review. As a result of this design review process, the authority concluded that the design of the proposed dwelling is of exceptional quality, which meets the standards required by paragraph 80 of the NPPF. Moreover, they consider that it is a truly outstanding design. At the last meeting, members sought clarification about 2 issues in particular, those of the previous access application and that of the energy performance of the building. In response to this, we produced 2 comprehensive reports to address these issues, which will have been circulated to members. In terms of the access, an application was made in July of last year and approved last October. Both the existing access points to the site to the east and west have very poor visibility due to being close to bends in the road. This has always been a safety concern when accessing or leaving the site with large and slow vehicles. The new access point achieves much greater visibility and has the full support of the Highway Authority. Large vehicles can now pull in well clear of the carriageway when the gates are closed, further improving the safety of the new access point. Since completing the new access in December last year, my clients have been using it to undertake management of the existing woodland. A significant amount of self-seeded blackthorn scrub has been cleared to encourage a greater diversity of flora and to ensure the long-term success and viability of the existing planting. But most importantly, in terms of energy, the house is not only carbon zero in use, but in fact exceeds this by being carbon minus. This means that over a 12-month period of building being occupied and used, net CO2 emissions from its operational energy are zero.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. The house is designed to utilise passive solar gain with significant levels of insulation. It has a ground source heat pump, integrated solar panels and significant battery storage. It will be an exemplar of performance. In conclusion, we've clearly addressed both of these issues thoroughly, but stress that the application is rightly being considered in terms of NPPF 80. Both design review and your own officers have concluded that the scheme does in fact meet this high bar of design and have therefore given full backing to the scheme to recommend approval for what we consider is an outstanding scheme. And for this, I really do appreciate the comments that the officers have made this evening.
That is the end that you're allowed, I'm afraid. Now, do members have any questions? Councillor Dockerer first, if any.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Any more? Councillor Goodrick.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if officers would be kind enough to clarify para 80 for me, because it says actually avoid development of isolated homes in the countryside, and I'm sure there was a suggestion that this was actually going into a village, so that would make that useless. The suggestion from one of the speakers was that it was actually going into a village setting, and para 80 says avoid development of isolated homes in the countryside. Well, if it's going into a village, it's not a problem, surely. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think, you know, we take this, the extent to which something is considered to be isolated under national policy is self for judgment. The main report talks about the case law that distinguishes isolated dwellings in the countryside from settlements. It is outside of the settlement that we know as Sheriff Hutton, and we do take the view it is an isolated dwelling under the provisions of what is now paragraph 80.
Chairman, just to add to that, I think the isolated development point has been in para 79 and prior to that para, I'll say 55 because I think it was 55, but it's been changed a couple of times, and it is one of those exceptions to permit development in isolated locations, a bit like your agricultural workers dwelling is also one of the criteria. But I think as Jill said, that is a judgment call, and as members will be aware, we've had a number of applications for either para 55 or prior to this para 79 applications. I think one at Musley Bank at Low Hutton in the AOMB and two on the edge of Ampleforth. I think in those instances the isolation point was raised and considered by members, and on both occasions considered to be isolated, even though I would suggest in those instances probably they were nearer to the established built-up settlement than this one is. So I've no qualms that were this to be judged by anybody else, they would regard it as being in an isolated location.
Any more questions? In that case, I will open it up to debate, and Councillor Dockerer is the local member, I believe.
Well, the next one. I'd like to see this built. I think we'd be lucky to have such an innovative design in Rydale. I know the land. I've watched this go through the planning, because obviously being a substitute, I've seen it. The build standard is, you know, looks fantastic. It ticks all the environmental boxes, and I think we would be really lucky to have this in Rydale. I'd be delighted to see it built.
Anybody else? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the applicants for the extra information, because I think the extra information with regard to zero carbon reaching satisfying zero carbon targets was really beneficial. Some concerns were raised by the Design Council, and these have been addressed. I'm satisfied that there will be a net biodiversity gain, and it would be great to see a wildflower meadow. We've approved, in my opinion, far more contentious para 55 and para 79 dwellings, all within an AONB setting, and this is not in an AONB setting. There needs to be consistency in our decision making to avoid a lack of confidence in this committee, and also to avoid handing decisions to the planning inspectorate and the consequential costs of what appeals would be if we weren't consistent in those decisions. So, Chairman, I'm happy to move approval for this application, and I do hope other members will see the benefits and second it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Potter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The comments from Councillor Goodrick just remind me that about consistency, I seem to recall at least 2 out of the 3 were recommended for refusal, so that's not quite consistent. I made comments on this last time, so I'll keep to the things that have changed. I was interested in the letter from Mr. Taylor that says verbally informed that the plan was to create a new dwelling using this access as the entrance, and another bit that says obviously shows the applicant's intentions all along to build on the site. And you might recall I was the only one to oppose that new entrance on the basis that it just didn't add up. But of course that's all in the past now, so I don't think that counts any longer. The interesting bit is this, the amendment that turns it into paragraph 80. I was certainly very pleased to see the energy credentials of this building that were even better than last time it was presented. But unfortunately now it says the innovation test has been dropped altogether. So that doesn't really have the same weight that it did on previous similar applications. So we've got the local plan that this seems to be almost completely contrary to, and yet paragraph 80 of the NPPF, which supports it, but on a very much subjective view. And with what remains of this paragraph 80, says it's truly outstanding, reflecting the highest standards of architecture. Well, I would agree that it's very interesting and quite pleasant. I've got no objections to it in those terms, but truly outstanding I would take issue with, because that really is a high bar. Another very interesting bit is would help to raise standards of design more generally in rural areas. Well, we've had a few of these things, and I'm not aware of David Wilson Homes or any of the other builders doing anything like a Castle Howard or even a Grand Designs. So I'm afraid this just doesn't seem to rub off, apart from a few very isolated buildings from people who, you know, have got the money to invest in that sort of thing. So the innovation, well, of course the innovation is not applicable anymore, but the standards of design sort of being applied more generally doesn't seem to be the case. Now, moving on to the next bullet, it would significantly enhance its immediate setting. Well, I would say that increased woodland would significantly enhance its immediate setting, and I fail to see how this actually enhances it, apart from the fact that it's pretty much hidden behind the existing woodland. But the second part of that, sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. Well, to my mind, the defining characteristics thereof are rural, agricultural, woodland and stone-built dwellings. And this doesn't appear to be too sensitive to that. So in subjective terms, I still can't see that this meets the paragraph 80. And balanced against that, or weighed against that, are our own policy, which we seem to be quite happily ignoring. Which does remind me, I saw an article only from last week's Gazette with the Chris France remonstrating with his committee for going against their own policy. And it seems to me that we've got this the other way around. We seem to be not actually applying our own policy with our recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there anybody else? Does anybody else wish to speak?
Chairman, I think there is a point of I need to come back on what Councillor Potter's just mentioned in terms of policy.
Could you come back after?
At an appropriate time, yes, please. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I tend to agree with Councillor Potter in regard to the requirement to significantly enhance its immediate setting. I mean, I've looked at pages 51 and pages 52 of the agenda, and pages 50, which deals with this, and pages 51 seem to suggest that the building is going to be so inconspicuous it's not going to be, this is going to be hardly noticed at all. And then page 52 then goes on to say that it will look grand where it is and appear 4.4 metres above the horizon. To my mind, a building of this type would be incongruous in its local setting, and in that respect, I agree with Councillor Potter. Would the officers like to come back?
It was just on a point of information which the first report did wrestle with, and I think Jill presented that last time, which was in the context of what our current development plan does say, which obviously is a child of its time. It dates back to September 2013, if my memory correctly serves me. And at that time, the context for policies to be contained in strategies was that having gone through all the examination process, that at that point in time, local plans or local development plans shouldn't replicate policies in the national planning policy framework, which was fairly new at the time. I think it was 2012. I remember us having to do a lot of amendments to the plan to pick it up. But because of that, our development plan doesn't have a policy in relating to exceptional houses in the countryside, which a lot of more recent plans do. So what that does really is give us a plan which has got quite strong guides in terms of where development should or shouldn't go, but it's silent on the exceptional country house type policy, which is in national policy. So what that does do is bring national policy quite importantly to the fore when we consider all of these applications. And you are right that in terms of I think we've had 3 others that I can remember in my mind's eye, one of which was at Hutton's Ambo, just down the road, not in an isolated location, if members can recall where it is, and one of the ones at Ampleforth, which had been through, I think all of these have been through a design review process, but we had our own concerns. And you are correct, I think 2 out of those 3 at the time were recommended for refusal. However, the local planning authority, which is this committee, actually approved all of those applications, if you remember. And in fact, we had one called in by the National Planning case, or called in as a result of a request to the National Planning casework team at Ampleforth, largely because it was in the AOMB as well, I think. But having had that called in and reviewed, I think despite the wrestling with the issues, the casework team took the view that the members' decisions, this committee's decisions, were the correct decisions in terms of weighing up the impacts on the locality, the impacts on the countryside, which there have been some changes to the words, but not greatly changed. Perhaps the biggest change, which you picked up on only this last fortnight, was the reference out of this policy, dropping the particular reference to innovation, because I think innovation, you know, everybody's gone through the innovation curve and it's flattened out now, so innovation's very difficult. And I think there have been some cases that have struggled on that. And I think that's why government has responded to it by taking innovation out of that policy, but it's plopped it into the design policy further down. So it's still encouraging new designs to have innovative elements to them, such largely around energy consumption. So national policy, although it's not in this paragraph, is in another paragraph just further down. So I think the efforts that they've gone to actually sign up to these credentials, because I think, again, we've had those discussions in this committee about, well, they're saying they're going to do this, can we condition it? They're proposing it and offering that up at this point.
If everybody has said everything they wish to say, we'll go to the vote.
Chairman, it hasn't been seconded.
Yeah, that's moved and seconded then. So that's for approval.
The names in alphabetical order.
Yes, by all means.
Councillor Andrews. Yes. Councillor Brackstone.
Against.
Councillor Dockwra.
For.
Councillor Goodrick,
For.
Councillor Graham,
For.
Councillor Potter,
Against.
Councillor Ryby,
Abstain.
and Councillor Windris.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. I take that as there are 4 votes for, 3 votes against and 1 abstention, Chairman. So I think the application stands approved.
Right, thank you. We'll now go on to the next item, which is on page 114. And that is the item number 20-00088 FUL, the Motherby Parish Council, the erection of the extension to existing feed bins to allow installation of additional 12-number bulk loading bins for animal feed storage, together with integral weighbridge at Motherby. Do we have an officer to report on this? Thank you, Niamh. When you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. BATA, as you'll be aware, it's a local animal feed compound milling business, also selling fuel and animal welfare products, and it's had a presence at this site since the late 19th century, with the extensive planning history already summarised in the report. The site is situated within the development limits of Motherby and within an area designated as existing employment land under the Rydale local plan. This proposal seeks planning permission for the erection of an extension to the existing feed bins to allow the installation of an additional 12 bulk outloading bins for animal feed storage, together with the integral weighbridge. This has been the subject of a member site visit and has been deferred at 2 previous meetings. As you'll be aware, there have been objections from neighbouring residents and the parish council in relation to this scheme, which were summarised within the previous reports, and particularly in relation to potentially enhanced noise and disturbance. However, the council's environmental health team have confirmed no objection to the proposal, following a receipt of a noise assessment and associated noise management plan, which BATA are content to be conditioned for compliance throughout the entire site. The Environmental Health Manager has provided an additional comprehensive consultation response contained within the August update report, following review of the document provided by KVA Planning on behalf of the Parish Council. This reconfirms that they are satisfied with this proposal. Officers have also made public the legal advice received from the barrister at King's Chambers in Leeds, which is a specialist planning and environmental chambers. That is both the advice dated the 6th of July, which was previously provided to members, and that of the 26th of July. And that latter response from Council considers in depth the KVA planning report. This was made available in the annex of the committee report, starting on page 120. So just in terms of an update, following the July meeting, a number of questions were put to BATA from Councillor Mason, including on behalf of the Parish Council and from Ms Rains on the 15th of July. These included various requests, including proposed conditions to restrict hours or days of operation, specific conditions to restrict noise decibels at various points of the day and night, and seeking additional communication between BATA and the community, together with the question previously raised at the meeting, seeking confirmation of the 5-year projected tonnage output. Now, the response from BATA, which was received dated the 26th of July, was provided in full, starting on page 175 of the agenda, published on the 26th of July, with a copy sent to members. The Parish Council and neighbours were also alerted to the publication of this report and the appendices. Members and third parties will therefore have had the opportunity to read and digest this response. The applicant indicated in their view, rather than specific conditions, that there were other more appropriate ways in their view to control noise at the site, such as the noise management plan, which was considered acceptable by the environmental health officers and with direct liaison with the environmental health team. The rationale behind not accepting specific hours of operations conditions at the site was also discussed, and no specific projected tonnage figures for the next 5 years were provided. In addition to that, further comments were received by Councillor Mason this morning, including additional suggested conditions. The first relating to a vehicle survey to be undertaken prior to additional bins being installed, essentially as sort of a benchmarking procedure, and the second relating to a further noise impact assessment for the additional bins once installed if the application were to be approved. This email from Councillor Mason and the response from BATA's planning agent are on members' desks and have also been emailed. The response from BATA reconfirms their perspective. I won't repeat this, but they have indicated that they would oppose the imposition of these conditions. Therefore, lawfully, we cannot add these conditions. We are obliged to either approve with the conditions as recommended or refuse the application. As you'll be aware, the officer's recommendation remains one of approval, and members will be aware we have 2 speakers, which is the Parish Council Chairman and the Planning Agent for BATA, Jennifer Hubbard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. Can we then go on to the objector from the Parish Council, Nigella Ballard, please? Are you there, Nigella?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Right.
Would you like to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Please. The Parish Council has to bow to the superior knowledge of Council on the matter of material change of use. We welcome his view that the District Council has enforcement powers which can be used against breaches of existing planning conditions regarding noise levels and any harm from noise that may arise as a result of increased activity on the site. The Parish Council continues to argue that the change to the hours of working to 24/7 is an intensification of use of the site. The approval of this development will lead to further intensification of the use of an already problematic site, resulting in more noise, disturbance and vehicle movements. It is the noise from the mill site at night which is the major problem, and while the proposed bins may not increase this, the levels currently recorded from the mill in general by the Parish Council, residents and the Environmental Health Officer on the 25th of February, which was after noise mitigation at the Grinder House, are well above WHO guidelines for night time. The NOVA report relies on mapping to estimate noise at dwellings rather than actual readings and is therefore unreliable. The noise at night from 11 to 7 a.m. from the whole mill needs reducing, and while this does not fall within the remit of this application, we sincerely hope the BATA will address this in the very near future by reviewing their working hours and applying further noise mitigation measures. The responses that BATA have given to the questions from the Parish Council and residents, which were sent via Councillor Mason to planning after the July meeting, are generalised and do not answer specific points raised. There's a lack of evidence-based responses regarding, among others, production levels at the site and vehicle movement. There's no evidence to support BATA's assertion that the proposed development is necessary in order to safeguard the future of the company. In their conclusions, VATA state they will remain good neighbours and work with the District Council, Parish Council and residents. We sincerely hope that they will hold to this promise, although given their past performance, we are somewhat sceptical. If councillors are minded to approve this application, the Parish Council request, as I did at the July meeting, that included in the conditions are ones regarding vehicle movements, limiting the times of these to between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Sorry, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and an absolute noise cap of 42 decibels during night hours, as recommended by numerous government and WHO guidelines. We are relying on you as members of this committee to make the right decisions.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. And to impose suitable conditions to protect the amenity of the residents of the neighbourhood. And I would like to thank officers and councillors for the considerable time they have spent on this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I call the agent, Mrs. Jennifer Hubbard, please? Are you there, Jennifer?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
No, I can't hear you well at all.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yep. Thank you. You have 2 thorough officer reports, advice from environmental health officers and legal opinion. BARTA has confirmed it will willingly continue to work with the Council's EHOs to address any reasonable noise complaints. It will maintain an ongoing noise management plan and provide an out-of-hours contact telephone number so people can report specific issues. It's fully accepted that these are important matters to the local community, but I cannot too strongly endorse your officers' views that they are not matters relevant to this application. Can I just explain exactly what the bins are for? BARTA provides a wide range of animal feedstuffs running into many hundreds of products tailored to meet customers' specific needs. Feedstuffs are manufactured to order. So if I order 3 tons of weaner pig food with a particular additive, this product is produced in a single batch. It's currently fed into 1-ton bags or 1-ton bins, which have to be transported by forklift, then individually emptied onto the conveyor, which discharges into a compartment in a delivery wagon. If a product includes drugs or other additives, the bags can only be used once. If not, they can only be used 3 times before they fall apart. And then they are either incinerated or sent to landfill. BARTA uses thousands and thousands of these bags each year, and they cost between £7 and £8. With the bins in place, my 3 tons of feed will be conveyed straight to a bin, which of course would only be a third full with my particular order. The feed would then be discharged directly into a delivery wagon, and so on to the next order, which might be yours, after cleaning the bin if necessary. The next product might be another 3 tons, or 1 ton, or 10, depending on the order. So you can see the existence of the bins is nothing at all to do with production volumes. Just rather efficiencies in handling materials, including, as well as massive cost savings, fewer forklift and wagon movements on site, and in consequence less noise and less plastic waste to landfill. I have to say that the additional conditions suggested by Councillor Mason and just now by the Parish Council, in my view, do not meet the legal tests of soundness and would be invalid if imposed. Residents' concerns about noise are understandable and can and should be dealt with through other legislation, but this is a simple application for some additional kit, 12 bins, to assist in the smooth operation of the business. Please keep the 2 issues separate when you determine this application. Thank you. I'll say that again if I've got some. Please keep these 2 issues separate when you determine the application.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? No questions? I have a couple of questions. And that relates to the barrister's advice on 26th of July. And on page 128, it says the KVA report set out at length the relevant noise policies contained in both local and national policy and guidance. These policies and guidance will be familiar to the Council and are not particularly controversial. Do I take from that it's agreed that the pages on the KVA report which deal with noise are correct?
Chairman, I think you need to read the whole paragraph of paragraph 11. I'm happy to read it out if you wish. The issue is in where it says the policies are familiar to the Council and not particularly controversial. The issue is instead to what extent they are relevant to the determination of the application. Again, this is limited by the scope of the application.
May I just kind of follow on from that? The Environmental Health Officer, in their very detailed additional comments as part of the August update report, had also reviewed the KVA document and had noted the author of the report has been selective on the guidance documents referenced, and specifically which parts of these have been included in the report. It goes on to note that some of the guidance for mineral planning authorities were put forward in order to try and establish noise limits, which wouldn't be appropriate in this environment, but that's just in addition to what Gary has noted.
And my second question relates to the conclusion, which I'll read of the barristers. I'll read out in full. The KVA report does not raise anything that causes me to revise the opinion I have previously provided. The points raised by the KVA report are ultimately quite narrow and, in my opinion, do not raise the issues that undermine the approach that's been taken by officers in assessing the application, and instead are simply an alternative planning judgment to that which has been set out by officers. Would you accept that alternative judgment is not necessarily wrong? Is it one that the KVA is entitled to hold?
Chairman, the whole concept of a planning judgment is simply that. It's a judgment. What I would say is we've spent over 18 months dealing with this application, getting it to the point where we've not rushed it to you. I think we would all agree. And it's probably, for what it is, probably one of the most thoroughly assessed applications I can think of in recent times. I think we're very comfortable with our judgment, Chairman, but I can't suggest that another professional doesn't have a judgment to make. But we've been working in Rydale dealing with rural planning issues for a long time.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, can we start the debate? I think Councillor, I think local councillor has asked Councillor Potter to speak on behalf of this one. Does Councillor Potter wish to speak?
Yes, I'm quite happy to start off. Thanks, Chair. Right. This is obviously a really difficult issue. I'm looking at on page 115 what the council concluded. In my opinion, the conclusion in the officer's report that there's been no intensification is legally sound. In planning terms, that presumably is true, but there has been intensification at this site over the last few years, and it has moved to H24 operations. Now, I'm well aware that if we look at this as a very specific and narrow application, then it meets the criteria. But unfortunately, if I turn over the page and look at page 116, where it says noise impacts of the proposal, it says the NPPF states that planning policies and decisions should prevent new development from contributing to unacceptable levels of noise pollution. So that is the NPPF saying that. So if there's any sort of increase in the level of pollution, surely we should be dealing with that. Now, here we have this problem of the specific application appears to be all right, and presumably, according to BATA, won't increase the noise, but the intensification of the site and the 24-hour operation clearly does. Now, planning officers may say, well, that's fine by us because that is planning, but we are councillors. We are representing the community, and there is quite clearly a problem in what is going on in a Motherby with this intensification. Now, if they double the number of these bins, that to me clearly indicates that this site is possibly going to double the intensification of the site. And I can't bring myself to divorce that and just say, I want to approve this specific application and ignore the fact that this will increase intensification. Now, we deferred this item at the last meeting so that BATA could talk to the community and answer their questions, deal with their concerns. I'm somewhat disappointed that this has happened in a very limited way, if at all. Now, the two conditions that were submitted this morning by Councillor Mason, I thought were absolutely ideal because they refer absolutely specifically to this application. BATA have said that vehicle movements will not increase through this application and in fact could reduce. And all this condition was saying is measure it. Just live up to what your claims are. And yet it's been rejected. Why? The other condition said, well, according to BATA, there will be no increased noise, and that is in the noise predictions outlined in the Nova acoustic report. And this condition says, prove it. Once this application, if it gets passed and it's up and running, prove that these noise predictions are correct. So effectively, it's call your bluff. You've made these claims about this application, this specific application, and these conditions say, right, further down the line, prove it, or you'll have to do something about it. Now, I'm really disappointed, and that's putting it mildly, that this has been rejected. The agent there said BATA would willingly work with the community, and yet by rejecting these, what I consider perfectly reasonable conditions, which apparently then, according to Neve, cannot be imposed, then we can't have these conditions. But that's not working with the community. That's not proving by BATA that they will live up to their claims. Now, I would have voted for this, I would have agreed with this, had those conditions been accepted. But unfortunately, I don't believe that BATA are working with the community in the way that they say, and I'm afraid I can't support it. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I do see that this is a predicament for us on the committee. The application that we have in front of us is only for part of the operation of that site. And at the moment, there are no operational controls on that site. And that is because in historical planning didn't put it there. And I don't think we can put it there now, which is disappointing. I do believe that the bins themselves could actually reduce the noise nuisance that's currently being experienced simply by the reduced handling of bags and the reduced use of forklift trucks, etc. And I do think that we need to have confidence in our environmental health team that if there is noise disturbance, that they will control that noise disturbance and issue abatement orders where necessary, and that they will get a grip of it. But I think we are in danger of crossing over into areas that perhaps we shouldn't be crossing into. Thank you, Chairman.
I will say my two pennyworth. Basically, I agree with Councillor Potter. Environmental health officers have different duties to the planning authorities. The environmental health officer is concerned with public health, and the definition of public health nuisance is very strict, and the standard for enforcement, you have to reach a very high standard of noise before you can have enforcement under environmental health. What we're talking here is about general amenity of the occupants, which is a much lower standard, it's a much lower level of noise that we would wish to see in the village. I mean, yes, this is part of a site, but if you keep on having new bits added to the site incrementally, you rapidly get into a situation where the site has extended to, has increased to such an extent that the whole village becomes a place which is difficult to live in, and the relationship between the community and BATA was completely broken down. I think the parish council has been very reasonable. They've produced a report from a qualified planner, which is accepted by our barrister as an alternative planning judgment. Therefore, you can look at the thing two ways. You look at it from the way that our officers look at it. You can look at it the way she looks at it. And maybe both of them are equally valid. But we have to concern ourselves with what is best for the community. And I feel the village has been very reasonable in coming forward with these two conditions that Councillor Potter says. If BATA can't accept the condition, then we refuse the application. They know what they have to do. All they have to do is to put in another application with these two conditions, accepting these conditions, and they can have their planning permission. That's what this committee is saying to them. I can't see that is unreasonable in the slightest.
Chairman.
The officers wish to come back.
Just on a point of detail, really, Chairman. I mean, clearly there have been more than one report presented to this committee, but I'm conscious that the constitution of this committee has changed this evening quite significantly. But on the agenda papers, I think from page, I'll say 337 onwards, is the 8th of June report. So it shows you how long this has been sort of going backwards and forwards from committee. But elements in that report which contain details relating to the noise management plan that had been looked at great detail by our own environmental health officers, who have separately been dealing with noise nuisance issues, as members will be aware. But that then distills to the recommendation on page 339 onwards, and members who haven't been in this room dealing with this issue before will see that there is a commitment to that noise management plan. And clearly that isn't, you know, dealing with the two conditions that have come forward today, but to suggest that this company is not engaged with the process to seek to try and work with officers and via officers through the community, I think is wrong to suggest that. It may not have gone as far as some members of the community would wish to suggest, but the recommended conditions on page 339 are still the recommended conditions, Chairman, and they do include a noise management plan, which our own environmental health officers are happy with. That's all I wanted to point out, Chairman.
Are we ready to go to the vote? Well, first of all, can we have a proposal, please?
Currently it stands as a recommendation of approval, Chairman, unless somebody changes it the other way around. But if we're refusing it, I probably would like to know the reasons for refusal, Chairman. I think members need to know what they're voting for refusal for.
I have a proposal.
Yes, I'm quite happy to propose that we refuse on the basis that of the impacts of noise and the fact that they don't want to comply with conditions that are appropriate to the specific application.
If I can capture that as, I think Councillor Potter's suggesting that this application would result in additional noise. Have to be additional, otherwise there's nothing more, and that impact on amenity locally through the additional noise is contrary to policies in the plan, which I would suggest are policy SP20, generic development management issues, the amenity aspects of that policy. That's the only policy I can really think of, but it would be around the additionality.
Yep, that sounds fine to me, thanks.
Chairman, if we're
is there a seconder? If not, I will second it from the chair.
So Chairman, just to clarify, we're voting for a refusal proposal from Councillor Potter, seconded by yourself, that the proposed development would result in an additional noise impact contrary to policy SP20.
And I would add something from the KV report about the cumulative impact of the development in connection with the rest of the site.
Is that the proposal? I don't know. Councillor Potter's proposal did not include that. I think it's.
But if Councillor
you've got to, whatever you're refusing and whatever we might refuse has got to be reasonable, Chairman. Otherwise, we run the risk.
Yes, we appreciate that. Is Councillor Potter prepared to add that in?
Yes, I'm quite prepared to add that in, and if there's any way that we can make reference to the noise issues out of hours, I think that's the key point.
Right, Chairman, if you want to put that to the vote. Councillor Andrews. This is for refusal.
For refusal, Chair.
Councillor Brackstone.
For.
Councillor Dockwra.
Against.
Councillor Goodrick.
Against.
Councillor Graham.
For.
For refusal. For refusal. Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Ryby.
For.
Councillor Windress.
Against.
Well, that's refused 5 votes to 3, Chairman.
And as we said, for the benefit of the applicant, all they have to do is to come back with another application, repeating it, and accepting 2 conditions.
Chairman, I don't want to prejudge a further application. I think we'll deal with the refusal tonight. Thank you.
Well, can we go on to item number 8, Chair? This is the land off Edenhouse Avenue, Old Moulton Road, Old Moulton. Who's speaking on this? Can you make your presentation, please, Neve?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If we could just go to the aerial map, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Okay. So the application site is an area of undeveloped land located to the north of Edenhouse Avenue, which is part of the location of the wider Eden Business Park development area, located to the west of the A169. Outline approval for B1 business, B2 general industrial and B8 storage and distribution uses was granted in this location as part of a 2015 approval, which is fully detailed within the planning history of the report. The site also falls within the Moulton Food Enterprise Zone, which is the subject of a local development order adopted by Rydale District Council in February 2017. The order identifies certain forms of development that could take place without needing detailed planning permission, together with a detailed design guide to create a cohesive approach to development in this location. In terms of this proposal, and this is described in more detail in the report, planning permission is sought for the use of land as a highways depot to include the erection of an office workshop building to the south and the erection of a salt barn to the northeastern corner, with associated car parking, a service yard and landscaping. This proposal is before members solely due to the fact that this is a major planning application in size terms. There have been no letters of objection in relation to this scheme. So if we could just go to the first photograph, I've only got a few here. This is a view of the undeveloped site looking westwards. And you can just see at the left-hand corner of this some of the existing development that's been undertaken to the south. The next photograph is looking at the same site but from the east, again with the existing development present just there. And within this you can appreciate the kind of very well developed landscaping belt that's already present to the north of the site. The next photograph is just a view from the south. Again, you can see the landscaping belt and broadly where the entrance and exit to the site would be. And then the next photograph just shows some of the development that's already undertaken to the south. So if we could go back to the aerial map just for context, that would be great. Thank you. As detailed in the report, this proposal is considered acceptable in policy terms. Whilst it doesn't relate strictly to food-related development, it is acknowledged that this is a strategic position centrally within the Rydale district with easy access onto the A64 trunk road, for which essential services carried out by Highways England can be provided. The use of renewable energy via solar panels is also welcomed. And in terms of design, this proposal has been designed with functionality in mind, but it also does incorporate a high quality appearance, and the form, the materials and the colour palette will result in visual continuity with the surrounding developments, as you've just seen in the photograph, and will be broadly in accordance with the requirements of the design guide associated with the local development order. Updated landscaping has also been provided in the late pages, and this includes significant landscaping to the south and hedging and trees to the east and west, with additional to be installed just to the east of the salt barn. Furthermore, this plot will ultimately become an internal plot and is set against the backdrop of the planted belt to the north. It's officers' view that this proposal would have no impact upon amenity, and North Yorkshire County Council Highways and Highways England were both content with the proposal subject to the recommended conditions. As you'll have noted in the report, a northern gas network pipeline bisects the northwestern corner of the site. Northern gas networks have been consulted and have liaised directly with the agent and have ultimately confirmed no objection to the proposal. Now, in terms of drainage, as you'll be aware, the application site is formally designated as Flood Zone 3 by the Environment Agency, and the proposal does relate to a less vulnerable use in terms of the EA's flood risk vulnerability classifications. The EA and the lead local flood authority are both content with the proposal, subject to conditioning it to be in accordance with the incoming info, which includes the flood risk assessment, and the Internal Drainage Board are also content. A condition to secure emergency evacuation procedures is also recommended. And just to provide some clarification following the publishing of the report, in terms of a sequential test is necessary, but officers have reviewed this and have concluded it does meet the requirements, being less vulnerable and in a strategic location for purpose-built and designed buildings for Highways England with their operational requirements in mind. There have been no letters of representation in relation to this. Malton Town Council were supportive, subject to the inclusion of acceptable mature screening, which the local planning authority are content with. Just as a note, following the late pages, due to satisfactory samples being provided and further detail on the site fencing, conditions 4 and 6 will be tweaked just to reflect that. So the officer recommendation is one of conditional approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. I don't think we have any speaker in regard to this, so I'll go straight to members' questions. Do members have any questions? No. Then we'll go into debate. Do members wish to say anything? Councillor Potter?
Me again. Yeah, thanks, Chair. The first thing I've got to say, which came up at the pre-meeting yesterday, is that this was supposed to be a food enterprise zone, and it's rather lamentable that it's turned into a bog standard industrial complex, but there's nothing we can do about that. I was somewhat astounded to see that this was in flood zone 3 apparently, because you'll probably be aware of my interest in flood issues, and I've seen about 5 major floods in my time around here and never seen this site get anywhere near flooding. So I'm quite happy with all the provisions, especially considering there's a substantial attenuation pond associated with the whole development. Oh, glory be. This will incorporate 192 solar panels and 2 EV charging spaces, and that's voluntary. It's a pity there's no policy, unless the NPPF has been tweaked, that actually says anything about this sort of thing. But how lovely that people are actually getting the idea that this is what we need. And dare I mention the application that's not yet come forward, but seems to be very interesting around Eden Camp. So, yeah, in summary, I see no problem with this whatsoever. It fits quite well with the site, and I'm happy to move approval. Thank you.
Chairman, just on a point of information, the planning permission wasn't for a food enterprise zone. The planning permission was for B1, B2, B8 uses in a livestock market, actually, on part of the site. The food enterprise zone that we spent a lot of time on was to actually bypass that process for people who might come along with a food-related business and actually pop on there without needing planning permission, provided they met the design codes. We've had none. So the planning permission actually is for general industrial uses, but it includes food.
Any other comments? Yeah, it was declared a food enterprise zone after planning permission had been granted. And the idea was that would give additional incentive to food companies who wanted to locate there. It was on a site which was heavily opposed by local residents in Old Malton for, I think, very good reasons. But that's all water under the bridge. We have a site which has planning permission for industrial development. It's been an open field for a very long time, and it's looked pretty awful. So it's nice to see that somebody's actually going to build on it. So I have no hesitation in proposing it if somebody will second it.
Chairman, didn't Councillor Potter propose? Sorry.
I
misunderstand?
I didn't think he actually said I propose. But,
yes, I said I'd propose that.
Oh, in that case, I'll second it.
Shall I go to the vote?
Yes, please.
Councillor Andrews. 4. Councillor Brackstone.
4.
Councillor Dockwra.
4.
Councillor Goodrick.
4.
Councillor Graham.
4.
Councillor Potter.
4.
Councillor Ryby.
4.
Councillor Windress.
4.
That's unanimous, 8 votes to 0, Chairman. Thank you.
Can we now go on to item 9, which is the change of use and conversion of 8 number grain silos to form 1 number 2-bedroom detached dwelling, to include the erection of a single-storey extension between silos as link structure, and a change of use of land within the red line to form domestic boundary with associated parking and landscaping at Home Farm, Braygate Street, Swinton. Who is the officer going to give his report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think I can see Alan Goforth online there on your screen. There were too many us to fit in tonight.
Right,
so
Alan, are you
I'm
there?
rather hoping Alan's online and audible.
Are you there, Alan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I'm here, and hopefully you can hear me. So item 9 is on page 220 of the agenda and relates to a planning application for the change of use and conversion of 8 grain silos to form a 2-bedroom dwelling. The application is reported to Planning Committee for determination following a call-in by an elected member. No objections have been raised by any consultee or member of the public. There's no updates to the report as published. In terms of the officer appraisal, it's considered that the proposal would reuse redundant agricultural buildings to form a single dwelling with a unique, high quality and energy efficient design. The dwelling will perform to passive house standards. The application is made on the basis of the occupancy restriction not being imposed, which is contrary to policy SP2 of the local plan. The design complies with paragraphs 130 and 134 of the MPPF, which support innovative design and highlight that significant weight should be given to designs which promote high levels of sustainability. The silos are distinctive structures of some historic merit in the model farm context and make a positive contribution towards the traditional farming landscape as a whole. The design also retains the functional appearance and cylindrical form, and the restricted domestic curtilage and the proposed planting would allow the development to assimilate with the designated landscape. The submitted viability appraisal produced by Savills confirms that a local occupancy condition would render the scheme unviable. It is also acknowledged that the dwelling may also only appeal to a relatively small section of the market in terms of taste and affordability. In conclusion, the proposed development involves the conversion and reuse of traditional rural buildings and the redevelopment of underutilised land and buildings. It is a sustainable alternative to the demolition of these otherwise redundant structures. For the reasons given in the report, the retention and reuse can be regarded as desirable in heritage and landscape terms. It is considered that the proposed development proceeding without the local occupancy condition represents the only viable long-term solution to ensure the structures have a sustainable future and continue to make a positive contribution to the designated landscape and the setting of the non-designated heritage asset, which is home farm. It is considered that the benefits identified above demonstrate that the development outweighs the disbenefits of departing from the development plan policies in relation to local occupancy restrictions, and on balance it is therefore recommended that planning permission is granted subject to the 15 conditions as listed in the report. A presentation that accompanies this report, if it's possible to bring up the slides onto the screen, I'll just talk through the photos. So the first slide is an aerial photo of home farm. It is within the open countryside and within the area of outstanding natural beauty. The site is approximately 2 miles west of Malton. As shown on the aerial photo, I've highlighted the main part of the site, which is subject to redevelopment and has an extant permission, which is currently being built out for the conversion of existing farm buildings for residential use. On that aerial photo, I've highlighted the position of the 8 silos, the subject of this application. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Ellie. So again, this aerial is just a close-up of the application site. So you can see the roofs of the 8 silos. On the eastern side are the 4 larger silos, the more recently constructed silos, and on the western side are the older, smaller silos. To the east of those silos is the renewable energy building, which serves the wider development site, benefits from solar panels, and it also is the hub in terms of the heating arrangements, which benefit from the ground source heating. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. So this photo is taken facing north towards the silos from one of the paddocks to the south of the farm. You can just make out the grey roofs, the conical roofs, and the cylindrical shape of those silos in that position. This photo was taken some time ago, prior to the redevelopment of the wider site. So the building on the right-hand side of that photo, it obviously doesn't have the solar panels installed at this point. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Again, taken from a similar position, just to show the relationship of the silos to the existing farm buildings, the brick-built farm buildings to the east. And this is those are the buildings which are currently being converted to provide a number of residential units. Members will recall that application, which was reported to Planning Committee at the time. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Again, this is just facing north towards the southern side of the silos, to the side of those brick-built farm buildings. As you can see, this is a more recent photo as work on site has progressed. You can just see the conversion works are currently underway. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So this view is of the southern elevation of the silos, taken from the internal access road. So those two silos at the front, they would be converted to form garages. So there would be an opening created in the fence line and vegetation removed to create a driveway to access those garages. Moving on to the next slide, please. A close-up of that elevation. In terms of the works proposed, they're outlined. Essentially, the roofs would be replaced, and in a frame, insulated frame, would be installed within the silos. And then once the internal works have been completed, in terms of the frames, the roofs would be reinstalled, as would the conveyor, which you can see in that photo, which would actually link to the renewable energy building to the east on the right-hand side of that photo to provide the services to those silos. So moving on to the next slide, please. Again, just panning round to the west, you can just see the conveyor that's referred to in the report. Next slide, please. Again, facing back. On this photo, you can, on the left-hand side, mounted ladders. Those features will be retained just to retain the character of these structures. And moving on to the next slide, please. Again, just panning round. As you can see, at the time of the photos, the silos are screened by vegetation. An arboricultural report has been produced, which highlights that there aren't any restrictions in terms of the existing vegetation, and the proposals do incorporate replacement planting and improvements to existing hedgerow and boundary treatments to provide enclosure. So moving on to the next slide, please. This is facing west along the internal access road. This actually loops to the south. So on the left-hand side of this photo, this road actually joins Braygate Street on the southern side of the application site. And on the right-hand side, you can see the silos. And like I say, this is where the access would be created to serve the garages. Next slide, please. This is the final slide. This is taken from the other side of the silos. So it's on this side of the building where the main alterations would occur. So it would relate to the older silos, which are actually screened on the right-hand side, screened by the existing vegetation. All the silos would keep their current form with the exception of the northwest silo as shown on the elevation drawings, where this area which would provide for the dining area, which is quite a feature as shown on the artist's impression. Okay, so that concludes the presentation, and I understand there's a speaker for this item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan. The speaker is Richard Dales. Richard, are you there?
Hello, Chair. Yes, I'm here.
Could you make your presentation, please? You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm sure sustainability is sometimes mistakenly bandied around at planning meetings by applicants. But the scheme you gave permission to in May 2019 at Home Farm, I hope has it in spades for a modern conversion of aged buildings. And this proposal furthers that. We've spent over £180,000 on a communal renewables building energy heating system already, which wasn't conditioned by yourselves at the time, and laid the infrastructure for a truly energy efficient development, which is now being occupied, and its green credentials are enjoyed by the homeowners. We laid nearly 5 acres of buried ground source collector array to power this system, and additionally the photovoltaic units generate over 26,000 kilowatts of power per year. This is big capital outlay up front, reaping its green benefits further down the line for everyone. This original scheme we didn't incorporate the silos in the original scheme, as we felt it was too difficult and costly to undertake the conversion at the time. However, it was the architect and Rydale District Council's conservation officer who felt that the loss of this part of the original farm was to the detriment of the wider scheme and landscape. Now that we have the security of completing some of the buildings, we've reassessed the silos, and whilst viability remains finely balanced, as you can see from the figures, we've put this revised proposal to you, as feel it benefits the whole development. The conversion of these iconic structures will create a one-off home, which uses advanced modern systems, ground source heat pump central heating system, a 95% efficient MVHR whole house ventilation system, further voltaic electric generation, and the use of its own water source, which will push forward the boundaries of efficiency, house design and conversion in Rydale. The electric generation alone can be used at source point and time for things such as electric vehicle charging and the heating system. It can be stored via batteries for short-term and medium-term consumption over a 24-hour period, and also stored in a thermal store linked with a ground source heat pump system for longer-term gains. We are happy for the Passive House standard to be conditioned in some way if that helps the committee underline these credentials in the proposal. This is a one-off design-led conversion on existing disused structures, reuse of which is being heavily promoted by central government planning ethos. It will not 30 seconds. Just any empty silo building in the area to be developed, because it has to be held in the context of this particular scheme at Home Farm. It will not render the authority's local occupancy policy weaker, but enable these buildings to be retained and used. I'm a local developer, having built over 100 homes in Rydale over the past 30 years, many with my partner CDP. We use local architects, designers, consultants, and with my own team of Malton-based tradesmen, we create undeniable support.
That is the end of your presentation, please.
Contractors and material suppliers. Thank you.
Do members have any questions? Councillor Potter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to know if these silos are actually listed, and have any other grain silos ever been listed?
Alan, are you there?
Sorry, Chair. I only caught the latter part of Councillor Potter's question. Would you be so kind as to repeat it, please?
Yeah, certainly, Alan. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if any of these, if these silos are listed, and have any other grain silos ever been listed, being as they are, their reuse can be regarded as desirable in heritage and landscape terms.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Potter. Yeah, in terms of the silos, they're not listed. There isn't actually any listed buildings on this site. The home farm, model farm site, as part of the earlier application for the redevelopment, it was established in liaison with the conservation officer that the buildings do qualify as non-designated heritage assets. But in terms of the silos in themselves, they are of limited historical or architectural merit, but in terms of the setting of the non-designated heritage asset and the contribution to the history of the site, and the designated landscape, there is some value in the retention of these structures.
Any more questions? Any follow-ups? I have, if nobody else has any questions, I have some questions. First of all, regarding the local needs occupation policy, where is there in that policy the paragraph which says that you can overcome the policy if you apply a viability test? Did you hear me, Alan?
I did, thank you, Chair. In terms of the wording of policy SP2, there is no specific reference, although it is accepted in planning in terms of the policy set out in the MPPF and the National Planning Policy Guidance that viability is a valid route in which to establish whether occupancy restrictions or indeed any planning restriction or legal agreement would render development viable or not. So it is a valid consideration and a route which is open to all applicants.
Chairman, just to add to that, we have had this issue also put forward to us more often than not in relation to conversion of chapel buildings throughout the district. I can certainly recall at least two that have come to committee. There was one in Barton Le Willows, where the cost of conversion was such that that building, which again was a non-designated heritage asset but considered to be worthy of retention, was not going to happen without the viability, the diminution effect of the local needs occupancy condition not being applied. So this committee has applied that approach to conversions of buildings to residential uses, Chairman.
So this is a policy which has been applied for the committee by the committee, which isn't written down anywhere, and which nobody can turn a page to and look up and find.
Chairman, viability is a planning issue, as you well know, and I think that the issue there will come before us in many different ways. It may come for us in relation to an affordable housing contribution or any other contributions, but you know, we've faced that as all local planning authorities do, and made what we all hope are sensible planning decisions based on the information that's put forward to us, which in this case is a very detailed assessment by, I think it's our ICS people. I think Alan probably will be able to confirm that.
So my next question is simple one.
That's right. That's right.
Sorry, sorry, Alan, I'm interrupting you.
Sorry, Chair. Just to confirm Gary's point that in terms of the viability assessment that we've received, it's been produced by Savills and those who have got the relevant experience and qualifications in doing those assessments.
Well, my next question is, this is not a paragraph 79 or paragraph 80 case, is it?
That is correct, Chair. It's not being proposed specifically under that part of the MPPF, although there are relevant paragraphs within the MPPF, I think referred to in the report, of paragraphs 130 and 134, which do have similar requirements in terms of innovative design, high quality design, and design that incorporates high levels of sustainability. So there is some similarities, but it isn't being proposed as an isolated dwelling explicitly under paragraph 80.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? In that case, we'll go into debate. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Dockerer.
I think it's incredible, this design. I think to be able to reuse these silos and have them occupied. I understand the viability, and I would really like to see the committee support this tonight. I think it's a lovely project.
Councillor Potter.
Yes, surprise, surprise. Looking at the positives first, passive house standards, absolutely exemplary. Very happy with the innovative use of these silos in architectural terms, if somebody wants to do it. And then unfortunately we come to the negatives, or should I say negative. Local needs occupancy. There's a paragraph on page 223 where it says the local plan strategy identifies that the provision of an appropriate mix and choice of new homes to address a range of housing requirements is central to the stability and sustainability of local communities and the district's economy. And never was that more true than in this post-COVID period where houses are absolutely ramping up. The last, what's it called, the affordability ratio was 13.5, which is absolutely appalling and means that those who are on the ladder are okay, anybody else is not. So we have a local needs occupancy clause. We also have a local plan strategy that says we will have the development in the towns and service villages. Now that was for a very good reason and it was found to be sound. That's because that's where the infrastructure is. If people don't agree with it, tough, that's our policy, as is the local needs occupation, which was supposed to be there for local people in the other villages that don't have the development, so that we don't end up with one great amorphous mass where the small villages morph into the rest of the towns. Viability, yes, it's an interesting one. If I wanted to build something, I would look at it and say, can I afford to build it? Can I afford to convert this, whatever it is, in this case silos? Oh, it just doesn't add up because I'm not going to be able to sell it at the right price. And it just seems astounding to me that there is absolutely no consistency in applying this local needs policy. Suddenly we approve of it when we want to, and then when somebody pops in with a nice scheme that it's a fantastic scheme, but it doesn't fit in with our local policy, and so we conveniently seem to ignore it as long as you put in a viability assessment that says, oh, I can't sell it on at a reasonable price. And I've seen, my recollection of this site is that they had a viability study similarly and managed to get out of, I can't remember whether it was local needs or affordable houses in the past as well, but of course that doesn't apply in this case. Now, as I said, I'm quite happy for somebody to convert silos if they want to, and it's certainly interesting, goes with the grand designs thing again. But if you can't afford to do it economically, why on earth are we giving people permission to do so? I mean, it says their retention and reuse can be regarded as desirable in heritage and landscape terms. Well, I would suggest that there's little architectural value in grain silos. There is agricultural value, yeah, and enough of these things exist currently to satisfy my heritage concerns. Would we have the same sort of policy with large agricultural steel sheds and say, well, they have a bit of heritage value as well, so we'll convert those into houses, providing, you know, it's affordable. It says represents a sustainable alternative to the demolition of these otherwise redundant structures. They're not listed. If they're redundant and it's not viable to convert them, why do it? It strikes me that it's unsustainable in terms of housing needs and prices, and are we just attracting yet more commuting city dwellers into the areas where our local policy says we don't really want them? it's just seems a bit bizarre to me. And yeah, all right, we're talking about a balance of, is this a fantastic sort of architectural feature? The passive house standards, yes, brilliant, but we're once again going against the very essence of our policy. And so I really find it difficult to support this yet again on this site as an exception. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Ryby.
I'm sorry, my eyes probably aren't the same as everybody else's, but the appearance of the buildings, conical grain stores, as being a delightful addition to housing doesn't appear to me to be good at all. And I recall not very long ago that I petitioned, not as a member of this committee, but as a councillor of the area, a redundant building which was argued it wasn't redundant, which looked kind of fitted in, and it was refused on the ground that it wasn't attractive to the agricultural scenery. I don't think this, as a residential development, is in any way could you describe it as an attractive addition to the agricultural scenery. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Windress.
Just going back to what Councillor Potter was saying, perhaps somewhere down the housing chain, there's someone moving up gradually, and perhaps somebody's moving out of an affordable so somebody else can move into it. Thank you.
Anybody else? In that case, I'll put my 2 pennyworths in. I don't actually agree with Councillor Potter. I think that the local needs occupancy clause should be removed forthwith. But if it's going to be removed, I think it's got to be done in the proper way. And I can't see. I mean, what we seem to be doing is we seem to be looking at each application and then finding an excuse for not applying it, and I think that is totally wrong. In regard to this application, we're told that how good the scheme is, and then we're asked to not apply the local occupancy clause. And then what do we see on page 226 as the description of the property? I'll read the paragraph out in it's 5 paragraphs at the bottom. I'll read the paragraph out in verbatim. The land value, the high build cost, external works involving site clearance, new driveway, paving, fencing, landscaping, drainage and utilities connections, and also the abnormal costs associated with the specialist conversion of those silos are noted, as is the overall risk to the developer. Furthermore, notwithstanding the local occupancy restriction, it is considered that demand in the sales market could potentially be further limited by virtue of the nature, style and shape of the silos, the distinctive appearance and layout only appealing to a relatively small section of the market in terms of taste and affordability. I just cannot see that if the building has so little merit, why we are seeking to apply the local needs why we are seeking to disapply the local needs occupancy clause. So I'm afraid I can't support this either. So we have a. So yes, will the officers like to come back?
Chairman, it's just to sort of go back to basics really with the report, and just to say that our policy does allow the conversion of buildings in rural locations. That's policy SP1, SP2. That's set out in the report. I think the issue here is, again, you make a judgment as to what that is, but undoubtedly this is not an off-the-peg solution to convert these buildings. They're circular to start off with. The bespoke nature of the cost of conversion of these buildings to make them habitable will be more than it would be for a conventional build. That will affect viability. That will affect the sale of the value of the property at the end of the day, which I think is what the author of the paragraph you just read out was alluding to. And that then cuts to the heart of, well, in this location where we would normally apply a local needs occupancy condition to a conversion, should we or not? Because that cuts to the heart of whether or not the scheme is viable or not. And roughly as a ballpark figure, a local needs occupancy condition will drop the value of a property by about 15 to 16% in terms of eventual sales values thereabouts. That's on a conventional property, so this is an unconventional property, so we're probably maybe a bit on the low side there. That all cuts to whether or not it will work or not, whether the scheme is worth doing or not. And that really cuts to the heart of this. That's what you've heard from the speaker tonight. It's your decision, Chairman, but clearly we have to deal with each case on its merits, on the arguments and on the information put forward. We can't deal with this on a blanket basis. That's why we have to deal with each application on its merits. Okay, so the argument here is we shouldn't apply the local needs occupancy condition. That really is your main decision, I think.
I'm afraid, Gary, no, the decision isn't mine. The decision is the committee's. So what are you suggesting? I mean, we have a motion, a proposal to grant permission, but I don't think we've had a seconder yet.
I'll second that, Chairman.
And are you suggesting that we should vote instead on whether or not we should allow the consent but impose the condition?
The proposer and the seconder have proposed the recommendation, Chairman, without the local needs occupancy condition.
In that case, I will put it to the vote. If you would like to take the vote.
This is for the development as recommended. Councillor Andrews.
Against.
Councillor Brackstone.
Against.
Councillor Dockra.
For.
Councillor Goodrick.
For.
Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Potter.
Against.
Councillor Ryby.
Against.
Councillor Windris.
For.
That's 4 votes each, Chairman.
In that case, I exercise my casting vote in favour of refusal.
Thank you. So
I beg your pardon. I have not been political on any of these issues.
Chairman, I'm not sure if everybody on the screen heard all of the decision, but the vote was 4 votes for, 4 votes against. The Chairman used his casting vote to refuse the application as being contrary to policy SP2 and SP21, I assume. Is that the case, Chairman? Contrary to policy SP2 and SP21?
Yes, Chair. Can I just make it clear that if I speak to people about any application, I'm not asking them to. I don't ask them to approve or not approve anything. I talk to them about the applications and the issues. And I certainly have no intention of politicising anything that goes on in this room, unless it comes to policy, of course. In which case, when it comes to policy, that is a political issue.
Chairman, I think this is a debate for outside of the council chamber, isn't it? Can we move on to item 10, please?
Yes, item 10, Chair. Item 10, members. This is the erection of a storage container for use as a hobby workshop, and it's a retrospective application. Which officer is presenting this? Thank you, Neve.
Chairman, we've been going just over 2 hours. Would you mind if we had a 5-minute break?
I will not object at all. But
So
literally,
I just need to have a
literally, can we make it just 5 minutes?
Yes.
Are we all here? Are we ready to go on with item 10, Gary? Don't think anybody's missing, are they? No.
We're all here, yeah. Thank you.
In that case, it's item 10, erection of storage container for use as hobby workshop. It's retrospective application, land off Westbourne Grove, Pickering. You're presenting it, are you, Niamh?
Yes.
Would you present would you do your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 6 Westbourne Grove is a detached 2-storey property. It's located within a cul-de-sac set into the south of Middleton Road in Westbourne Grove. If we could just go to the aerial map, that would be useful. That's great, thank you. So as noted, this application seeks approval for the retention of a storage container at 6 Westbourne Grove, Pickering for use as a hobby workshop. As described in the report, and as you can appreciate from the map here, the domestic curtilage of properties 1 to 7 Westbourne Grove is actually separate to the dwelling to the west of the access road. So hopefully you can see that at that point. As detailed in the report, the parcels of separated domestic curtilage incorporate a range of uses. There's garaging, lawns, vegetable patches, sheds, outbuildings, and so on. The storage container, which if we could just go to the first photograph, you can just see to the left-hand side of that image. The storage container spans 6 metres by 3 metres, and as part of the revised plans put forward by the agent, this container will be lowered by 180 millimetres. In my report, I actually noted 300, but I just needed to remeasure that, so apologies for that, but it is quite a minor adjustment to the report. Additionally, that would result in an overall height of approximately 2.6 metres. The storage container is also proposed to be repositioned slightly inset from the boundary, which would allow for the subsequent proposed installation of a new section of 1.8 metre high fence into the southern boundary, which is just essentially the continuation of the higher part of the fencing that you can see in that photograph. Furthermore, the revised plans propose the cladding of this storage container with horizontally boarded natural timber cladding. This proposal is before committee due to letters of objection and letters of support. These are fully detailed in the report. There is also a neutral response. So if I could just go to the next photograph, I'll just run through these quickly. This is looking west towards the domestic curtilage associated with number 6. It kind of shows what they use this separate amenity section for at the moment. And the next photograph shows the the storage container just beside the approved double garage, and kind of shows it in context with what is already there. The next photograph is a better kind of image of the storage container in its entirety. And the next photograph shows that just from the northern side of it. The next photograph is a view from further to the north within Westbourne Grove, and it's looking southward towards the domestic curtilage of number 6, but just overlooking some of the other domestic curtilages in Westbourne Grove. The next photograph shows the additional storage shed which was referenced in my officer's report, and the internal and sort of boundary fencing to minimise views of that. The next photograph actually shows in the middle here the domestic property of number 6, and you can appreciate just directly adjoining that to the side there is an existing single garage and additionally a carport as well. The next photograph is just really another view to the south, taking in more of the context of some of the surrounding domestic curtilages. And the next one shows a view where you can see the domestic curtilage number 6 to the left-hand side, and it's kind of facing towards where the cul-de-sac exits out onto Middleton Road to the north. The next two photographs, we'll just run through these quickly, are just other examples of the separate domestic curtilages at Westbourne Grove. And this is from the south looking north towards the container, but showing the domestic curtilage for number 7. Thank you. So as detailed in the report, whilst the proposed amendments that have come in as part of the scheme within the determination period, whilst they would make some improvements to the scheme, it's not considered that these are sufficient to address the material harm associated with this installation. It remains the view of the local planning authority that whilst we're sympathetic to the circumstances of the applicant following the recent fire, this amended proposal would incorporate a strongly industrial form and appearance, which wouldn't assimilate in this domestic setting and which would result in harm to the character of the application site and also the wider street scene. The high flat roof would still appear visually disconnected from the more traditionally scaled adjoining double garage with a height that would project beyond the eaves height of that building, and it's not considered that that would relate to high quality design. Whilst there are some other examples of flat roofs in the vicinity, those are more traditionally domestic scaled installations and also located in less exposed positions. It's considered that the overall scale of this installation and its highly visible position would render the proposed form, even with the improvements, still visually incongruous. Therefore, that would be in discordance with policies SP16 and SP20. We did note in the report that should an alternative proposal or scheme be put forward in the future, this could be considered by officers. As also noted in the officer's report, we are recommending refusal of the proposed amended scheme and authority to secure the removal of the unauthorised structure within a 2-month period from the date of decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. I believe there are 2 speakers. Mrs. Sue Sales, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you speak, please? You have 3 minutes.
Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to voice the objections of myself and my family. My husband and myself are homeowners of number 8 Westbourne Grove, which is one of the properties most affected by the siting of the industrial storage unit, with a full view of the container from our living room and downstairs bedroom window. Westbourne Grove is a quiet residential cul-de-sac, and the siting of an industrial storage container in the front garden of number 6 has caused considerable upset and distress to myself, my family and other neighbours since August of last year, prolonging the distress caused by the fire. On a point of detail, there are 10 properties in Westbourne Grove, and on page 275 of your agenda, you state that there are 7 letters of objection which were received by residents of Westbourne Grove objecting to the retrospective planning permission. You haven't listed one of those as being from my husband and myself at number 8. So can I correct that so that we're not admitted from that list, please?
Yeah, yes, of course.
I'm aware that amendments were made to this original retrospective planning permission, but even bearing in mind the amendments, my husband and myself still strongly object due to the following reasons. Firstly, the industrial storage container lowers the quality and character of Westbourne Grove. Due to its size and structure, it has an overbearing presence, which is at odds with the residential area it's sited in. Secondly, the container overloads the area in front of number 6, which already has a shed, an extensive double garage, and at times houses a caravan, a van, and up to 3 cars on its hard standing area. Unfortunately, the tree which helped shield this from the view of our property has been removed, as you've detailed in your report. Another reason for our objection is that an industrial storage container will still be identifiable as an industrial storage container, even if it's clad in wood. It will still be very out of character in a residential area and an eyesore from our property. The wood cladding will in fact just increase the external dimensions and height of the unit. Finally, the height of the storage container, even with the removal of fins and feet, will still be considerably higher than the proposed fence to screen it, even before the added height of the cladding added to it. It will still be very visible from our property and from neighbouring properties, and higher than normal domestic shed or garden buildings would be. With its flat roof, it will still look very industrial in nature and not in keeping with its surroundings at all. We strongly object for those reasons and would welcome recommendations for its removal and the installation of fencing along the southern boundary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now the applicant, Mr. Pete Wood. Are you there, Mr. Wood? Are you there, Mr. Wood?
If Mr. Wood is not there, I do have the letter that he's put forward.
Could you read it then, please, Neve?
I've got the letter here, Chairman. Shall I start reading, and hopefully if Mr. Wood resumes?
Yes, please.
Please find below the words I wish to say to voice my objections. Oh, sorry. Would help if I've got the applicants rather than the objectors, Chair. Oh dear, it's been a long night. I would just like to say that after our terrible fire that burned down my wooden hobby workshop and garage, etc. in 2020, I purchased a metal office style container with a side door and 2 windows with metal shutters. Because the metal container was more secure and fireproof, I did not think I needed planning permission, as there had been a shed there for 30 years. I'm willing to clad the workshop in natural wood, which would make the container look like a wooden shed, and paint the flat roof a colour that suits you. Also extend my 6-foot fence down the side of the hobby workshop, so all you would see is the top 2 feet of the workshop, which would be clad in natural wood. The hobby workshop is the same length and height as my double garage that it stands next to, which has planning permission. I still have plenty of parking on my land for 4 or more cars. I cannot use my double garage for my hobby workshop, as I have my 2 classic cars in there. Also, the garage that joins the house is used as a utility room, as we have a small kitchen. The hobby workshop does not stop any light from the neighbouring properties or overlook any nearby. I honestly can't see anything wrong with the new plans. It comes under size and height. It comes in under size and height. Just because it has a flat roof does not make it so bad. All buildings do not have to look the same, like the contemporary house down the road from Rydell House, Malton, that has flat roofs. Regards, Pete.
Thank you. Do members have any questions? Yes, do you want to make a point, Neve?
Yeah, sorry, it's just in relation to Mrs. Seale's point. I do apologise. I have listed number 2 twice instead of number 8 Westbourne Grove and number 2 Westbourne Grove. But I can confirm that her comments were fully taken into consideration as part of my determination, and her name is listed as one of the persons who've made a representation at the top of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Neve. I'll come back again. Are there any questions? As there are no questions, does anybody wish to... Oh, sorry, there is a question. No. In that case, would it, can we go into debate? I think this is Councillor Potter's. Or is it your ward? Councillor Braxton's ward. Could you speak then to this, please, Councillor Braxton?
I'll keep this very short. I have visited Westbourne Grove twice in the last 6 weeks, and the last time was yesterday. And though I have every sympathy with the applicant following the fire on his property, I have to say I agree with the officer's report and the parish council's comment that the shipping container is an incongruous feature within the residential setting. And in light of this, I would support the officer's recommendation for refusal. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Potter?
Yeah, assuming that Councillor Braxton is proposing that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, my only comments are that I've seen on several, in several different places, references to business use, commercial unit, industrial unit, and even the supporter said supporting business growth. So if this had been recommended for approval, I would have been asking for a condition that there was definitely no business use, because that would have required a change of a planning permission for change of use. So I'm happy to second the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? In that case, can we put it to the vote?
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
For the officer's recommendation.
Councillor Brackstone.
For.
Councillor Dockwra.
For.
Councillor Goodrick. For. Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Ryby.
For.
Councillor Windress.
For.
And just to confirm that the recommendation also seeks authority for the enforcement action as well.
Yes, I think we all heard that, Chair. So the enforcement action is also authorised. Agenda item 11. This is the formation of lay-by to serve the sewage treatment plant, accessing and egressing the existing highway verge, land off Moulton Road at Yeddingham.
Chairman, would members like some of the higher level lights on? It's getting a little bit darker.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea, Chair. Sorry, Gary, I didn't really mean to call you Chair, but there we are. Item 11 then, which I've read out the title. Who's going to present this? Niamh again. Would you like to present it then, please, Niamh?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. If we could just have the aerial map on the screen, that would be great. So this application site relates to a section of the public highway verge to the north of Moulton Road in Yeddingham. It's located on the approach to the village when entering from the southwest, and is located to the south of the residential property number 1 Moulton Road, which is indicated on that image. This area of land is also located directly adjacent to the sewage treatment plant that serves the village, which isn't on main sewers. The site is located within Flood Zone 2 as defined by the Environment Agency. And as you'll be aware, this application seeks permission for the formation of a lay-by to serve the sewage treatment plant for access and an egress in the existing highway verge. Supporting information from the applicant dated the 10th of June noted that the lay-by is the final stage of a wholesale renewal of the sewage treatment plant, which is of course an asset to the village through the replacement of aging apparatus. The lay-by will allow tankers and vehicles visiting the site to do so safely without having to park in the carriageway or pull onto the verge, potentially causing damage, a scenario which is in the best interest of highway safety for operatives and all other road users. The current proposal is related to an updated third revision of the scheme following comments and concerns having been raised by the highways officer and myself as the case officer. Sorry, excuse me. This relates to a much reduced revised scheme. It's a more simple pull-on, pull-off lay-by without an island or bollards, and it spans approximately 18.7 metres in length and 3 metres in width. As with the previous schemes, this would incorporate porous grass-seated truck pave, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. The relocation of the village sign and an electricity pole with the position still to be confirmed. As you'll be aware, as detailed in the report, there were an objection from the occupier of number 1 Moulton Road and also the parish council. Following the re-advertisement of the revised plans, the parish council maintained their objection. They noted the reason for that is due to the potential danger of having a lay-by on a bend, possibly attracting antisocial behaviour, cost, and existing arrangements appear to be fit for purpose. The agent did respond to that, and they said that this would allow wagons to be clear of the road, which in their view is better than vehicles being parked on the bend. And in terms of attracting antisocial behaviour, there is some sort of natural surveillance due to the close proximity of the residential properties in the village. So as detailed in the report, it's considered that this proposal does meet with the relevant policies, SP1, SP11, SP7 and SP20. And in terms of character and form and landscaping, the approach to Yedenham along Malton Road is attractive and it is characterised by rural fields and green verges, but at the point of the proposed lay-by, the site could be considered to be fairly well visually connected with the developed land within the village. It's located approximately 5 metres beyond the village development limits and within 2.5 metres of the existing sewage treatment plant. And as we've detailed, significant changes have been made to the scheme to reduce the scale and the visual impact, and it's considered that these have mitigated the originally identified harm and that now it is appropriate in terms of character and form. The concerns raised in relation to potential amenity impacts associated with the lay-by are acknowledged, but it is noted there's a number of lay-bys across the district in proximity to villages and residential dwellings. The point raised by the agent is considered relevant where they did highlight the sort of natural surveillance that discourages antisocial behaviour, but additionally there is personal responsibility for all citizens not to engage in such behaviour. It is therefore not considered that this proposed change of use would result in material levels of disturbance, nuisance or harmful amenity impacts. The Highways officers have confirmed that they have no objections to the scheme subject to conditions, and they were fully aware of the Parish Council's second response and they took that into consideration when forming theirs. There was no response received from the Environment Agency, and it's considered that the porous nature of the construction is welcomed in terms of surface water management. Therefore, to conclude, it's considered that this proposal would help to improve the existing access arrangements to the sewage treatment plant and could be carried out without material harm in terms of amenity, character, form and highway safety. Therefore, it's recommended for conditional approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niamh. There are no speakers, so are there any questions? If there are no questions, can we go to debate? And whose ward is this in, I wonder? It's Councillor Oxley isn't here, so Councillor Potter?
Yeah, me again, I'm afraid. I have to say I found the comments from the parish council, should we say, interesting. I mean, looking at the picture that was on there, development in open countryside, right on the edge of the village next to the houses, attracting antisocial behaviour. I just see this as a perfectly sensible and rational plan to put a lay-by in which will make it much safer, and I'm quite happy to move approval. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Councillor Windrush seconds it. Can we take the vote?
Thank you, Chairman. Right, Councillor Andrews?
For, Chair.
Councillor Braxton?
For.
Councillor Dockwra?
For.
Councillor Goodrick? For. Councillor Graham?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
Councillor Ryby?
For.
Councillor Windrush?
For.
That's unanimously approved, 8 votes to 0, Chairman.
Thank you, Gary. We now go on to the next item, which is item 12, which is a householder application, erection of a two-storey side extension, Gower House, Redcar Lane, Wart Hill. Who's going to present this?
Jill's just coming to the chair.
Would you make your presentation, please, Jill?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is an application for a two-storey side extension to a detached property at Wart Hill to provide an additional bedroom over a covered driveway. It's before members this evening as we have had objections from neighbouring residents on either side of the property and from the parish council. They're detailed in full in the report, but in summary, the concerns from objectors relate to the design of the scheme, in essentially the resulting width of the property across the curtilage, which is considered to be detrimental to the street scene, and related to that impacts on the openness of the green belt. The impact on trees at the site, and concerns relating to the amenity of neighbouring residents, in particular Missenden House, which is to the west of the application site and to the west of the proposed extension. They're concerns that relate to the scale and mass having an overbearing impact on the occupiers of Missenden House and loss of light to that property. The report discusses loss of light in terms of some rules of thumb, 25-degree rule of thumb and 45-degree rule of thumb. And there are some plans that I think are particularly complicated and quite difficult to understand that have been prepared by the applicant's agent in an attempt to understand the implications of these rules of thumb. They are just that, and my view is that they're not particularly directly applicable to this scheme, and I'll explain why when we look at the photographs. But in essence, a 45-degree rule of thumb, it tends to look at the impact of light from an extension to a property which is at right angles to its neighbour. So it particularly relates to sort of, it's used often in relation to terraced and semi-detached properties that are being extended out, and there's potentially then an impact on the window of an adjoining property and loss of light to an adjoining property. The 25-degree rule of thumb relates to extensions that effectively face existing properties, and this is probably the nearest one to this case. That said, the orientation of the properties are such that the proposed extension is offset from the habitable room in the neighbouring property, and therefore it's not directly that 25-degree rule, which relates to loss of light from vertical height of an extension that faces an existing property, is not directly applicable in this case. I think you probably understand it more once you see the images of the site and the relationship between the two properties. So if we could just have a look at the photos, please. This is just an aerial view of the property outlined in red on the street. I think from this photograph, you probably do get quite a good indication of the street scene. I think it's very clear that there is a very strong sense of space between the road and effectively the building line. They're all set back from the road. I think what is less obvious from that aerial image is a uniform separation of space between properties. You know, there's clearly from that aerial view, you can see that there are properties on that street that have been extended to fill the width of their curtilages. I still think from a street level view, looking across properties, you still get a sense. Even then, you still get a sense that there is some space between properties, and that's because of the alignment of different driveways, etc. If we could just move on to the next slide, thank you. So that's the application site. The proposed extension is to the side of that dwelling. It's two-storey and effectively will cover that section of the drive which runs alongside the gable end, the western gable end of of the property. You just get a glimpse there of the neighbouring property, Missenden House, which is at the left of the picture. Just move on, please. That's just taken back from further back in the street, so you get a good view of the relationship between the two properties. So the two-storey extension will be to the side of Gower House. It will be an extension of the existing ridge line and eaves line, and that's the position of it in relation to the neighbour. The neighbouring property is a combination of single-storey and it's either 1.5 or 2-storey sections. The single-storey elements are those that are closest to the application site. You might not really get a good strong sense of the orientation of the buildings there, but that front single-storey section has a small window that serves a downstairs WC, and there's a front door sort of behind the car. The pitched roof section to the rear includes a bedroom. There's a window there that serves a bedroom, a habitable room, and I believe an ensuite bathroom. But the properties are orientated as such that rear section it won't face directly onto the extension. The extension is more aligned to the single-storey section of Missenden House that you can see to the front. So just move on to the next slide. That's just a view of the property, the application site from the rear. The two-storey extension effectively spans the length of that of the original gable, so it doesn't come back as far as the single-storey lean-to extension that you can see there. And you can just see how you perhaps be able to appreciate there from that vantage point that the way in which the site tapers. So at its closest point to the boundary of Missenden House, I think at the rear it's about 1.9 metres, and at the front the proposed extension will go right up to the hedge that you can see there. And just move on to the next. That's just another picture from the rear garden looking towards Missenden House. I think you may just be able to see part of the single-storey pitched gable section that has the bedroom in, which is sort of to the rear of the red tree. I'm afraid I don't know what species the tree is. If we just move on to the next one, that's just another photograph that is trying to show the relationship between the two properties. Again, the habitable room, the bedroom is in that section, which is to the rear of that tree. And as I say, because of the orientation of the properties, the proposed extension does not directly face that room. It's more to the front of the site from where we see it now. Just move on to the next picture, please. Again, just another more close-up shot of the location of where of the extension to the side of Gower House. Next picture, please. This picture is taken from the front of the neighbouring property, Missenden House. The orientation of Missenden House is quite interesting. Effectively, the front elevation of the property, that is the front elevation of the property. So the front elevation faces the side elevation of Gower House, although that section of the front elevation of the property, it includes the front door and it includes a downstairs WC window. There isn't a lot of fenestration on that part of the elevation. And there you can see the gable end of Gower House, and effectively that's where the two-storey extension will be. So there is some space between the properties that will be retained in terms of their built form, at the least. Move on to the next picture, please. That's a picture taken from the sort of what is the front elevation of Missenden House. That's the section that includes the bedroom window that's looking towards the application site. Again, the extension is further forward on the application site than that gable end of that section of the neighbouring property. The next picture, please. And just another photograph showing the relationship between that habitable room and the location of the two-storey extension. And next picture, please. And that's taken from the front garden of Missenden House, looking back towards the application site, and that's where I think you do appreciate the fact that the two-storey extension that effectively extends that gable is more in line with the single-storey element of the neighbouring property, and not the single story to the rear with the habitable bedroom. Next slide, please. And that's just a view, another view from the street, looking across towards the application site. And I think that's it. Thank you. Chairman, I think officers take the view that the design is acceptable and it is appropriate in relation to the host building, and wouldn't unacceptably detract from the street scene. There is a sense of space that is retained, that would be retained, and significantly the space at the front of the properties, which I think is probably makes the most contribution to the street scene. And we do take the view that the proposal wouldn't compromise the openness of the green belt. I think the orientation of the application property and the neighbouring property, Missenden House, are such that the proposed extension would not have an unacceptable overbearing impact on the occupiers of Missenden House or result in an unacceptable loss of light to any habitable rooms. Trees and hedges will be retained on the site, and we have a plan that includes all of those. And our tree and landscape officer is satisfied that the proposal wouldn't have a significant effect on trees on the site. So the recommendation is as outlined in the report, Chairman.
Thank you, Jill. I see there are two speakers. Mr. Jim Kidd, are you there, Mr. Kidd?
I am, if you can hear me.
We can hear you, yes. Would you like to speak, please? You have 3 minutes.
Sure, no problem. So I am Mr. Kidd, and I am the owner of the property identified as Missenden House. I just want to make the following observations and basically call out and emphasise some points, and then maybe just point out some of the commentary as made in the report. So here I'm referring to what for me is page 4 in terms of the effect on the neighbours. So I think the first thing I'd probably just outline is that in terms of matters related to planning, that I am a lay person. So in terms of, I introduced some of my understanding as relates to these BRE drawings. And actually, as we got into it and saw that they were, way more complicated, way more difficult. And actually, I concur with this, that I don't think actually either of those schemes accurately reflects kind of the proposal that you have in front of you today. That said, I suppose my small thing in there is that there is an acknowledgement in terms of the impact of that proposed extension in terms of the light. It notes it to be small, but it notes it to be small in relation to an already compromised position. So I'm not quite sure in terms of how this is weighted, but obviously a small impairment for an already impaired solution could actually be quite a material, large impact from my perspective. So I would like to question perhaps how that's weighted. And then thinking about the second part in terms of amenity, particularly here we're thinking about overbearing. And I think, actually the pictures do give a reasonably clear and fair indication of how the two properties relate to each other. And I'm pleased, in terms of the recognition or, basically calling out that what we're looking at is basically from the front of our house looking out. It's unusual. And again, perhaps if the buildings were side by side, maybe not so much of a problem. I did note in the narrative that it still describes that as the flank, and any way you read that says that that's the side, which it isn't. And I think, probably that's been made clear. It also contains our primary entrance and exit, and therefore I'm basically asking that you challenge the officers in terms of the narrative, in terms of that, you know, that really not being that much of an impact, and actually just ask that you consider the following. Paragraph 5 on page 4 indicates that the appropriate spacing is maintained, basically because of the driveway to Missenden House. I was looking at the plans. It notes the development is some 3.7 metres wide. So looking at the retained space, basically it takes half of the available space between the buildings. And what I'm trying to get, you know, I mean, yes, you can look at pictures, but I want to kind of have you imagine standing at my front door and somebody takes that 7.7 metre wall that's in front of you, 8 metres away, and moves it 4 metres closer. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. You're all welcome to come and stand on the front drive, take a kind of look at that. I describe that as overbearing. And so therefore, in terms of the assessment that's made in the report of the overbearance as being not significantly greater, I deem that to be an inappropriate description of the overbearance that's created by the proposed extension on the site. So in light of all of that, those are my kind of considerations in terms of the report. What I will say, obviously, the planning officers made a recommendation for approval.
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, should you be minded to follow that, I'm just looking for a couple of conditions. One is in terms of something around the protection of those trees and hedges. They've been asked to be retained, but I have concerns about that. And then secondly, in light of some of the other objections raised, I'd ask that a condition is made no commercial activity will be permitted on the site. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the applicant, Mrs. Claire Hartley. Are you there?
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you speak, please?
Hello, so I am the owner and applicant in respect of Gower House. I just want to raise a couple of points in contrast to what Mr. Kidd has just said. Firstly, the driveway to Missenden House is subject to an agricultural right-of-way that is a part of the consecrated land that belongs to the church at the rear. It could never be built over for that reason, so that open space will always have to be retained. It is subject to a right-of-way that is owned by the church. The extension will not be 8 metres closer to his home. The extension is less than 4 metres in width. So I'm a little bit confused as to his statement that this is going to move our house 8 metres closer to his. It isn't. He's incorrect in that statement. As to his comments about impacts on light, Mr. Kidd has at the same time said that they are entitled to a right to light, whilst also saying that he wants all the trees to be maintained. The trees are in fact blocking the light as it is. That is what is already causing the compromise to light. He cannot necessarily have his cake and eat it in that respect. We are really grateful to the planning officer for her thorough and detailed report. We're really grateful to her for her comments throughout. We have sought to incorporate everything that has been fed back to us. We would have welcomed the opportunity to have a conversation with Mr. Kidd. Indeed, when we started this process, we went round and showed him our plans, talked to him about the hedgeway. The hedge is mixed use. It is full of old netting. It is full of old wire. It is scraggly in parts. There are pieces missing. Our neighbours do not maintain it. That is what it is. We offered at our cost to remove the hedgeway, retain the trees and fence. They were happy with that at first, saying he would gain some move on his driveway. I don't know when he changed his mind about that. That's his right, whatever. But fundamentally, the hedge is not necessarily a thing of beauty that sits between us. It is a fairly unkempt design. We cut it back twice a year. To my knowledge, since he moved in a couple of years ago, they have not. We are, of course, very disappointed with the objections received, not least given these conversations. They were positive and we thought that this was going to be a simple matter. Perhaps we were naive in that. As per the report recommending the application for approval, all objections have been thoroughly addressed. Raising obscure rules of thumb as to 25-degree and 45-degree rules has put us to significant cost in terms of our architect having to revise plans, trying, as the planning officer has explained, to give very detailed information to show these things are not relevant. They should not be taken into consideration by this committee. They have been dismissed at length by the planning officers. We have also, as I have said, amended our proposed design on more than one occasion. We have agreed to the conditions that are set forward in the recommendation by the planning officer. We think they are appropriate. What we are simply seeking to do is the ability to extend our home so that we can remain in the village. I have lived in York my entire life. We have lived in this village and the neighbouring village for over a decade. I have 4 children. They've all been baptised in the village. They all go to the village school. It is a village of 60 homes. We have raised an objection with the parish council as we were not consulted about the objection that they made.
Consideration.
Excuse me, I'm speaking. That's incredibly rude. So we have,
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, we have raised an objection with the local parish council, which they are investigating. We did consider a possible loft conversion in the alternative to the side extension, but decided that design wasn't feasible for many reasons. The side extension makes perfect sense. It's how we will complete our home to give us enough bedroom space for our children to sleep in. I do not accept that there'll be any material adverse impact on Mr. House or loss of amenity, nor has any valid objection been made that has not already been addressed or considered at length. I would therefore respectfully request that the committee endorses the planning officer's recommendation. Thank you for listening.
Before we move on, the objector suggested two conditions, one in relation to a hedge and one in relation to industrial activity. Can I have the planning view on that, please?
Yes, Chairman. I think the use of a condition to ensure that the trees and the hedge are retained, we can certainly include. I think the use of a condition to restrict commercial activity, it would not be necessary effectively, wouldn't really meet the test of conditions. That would be something which would be subject to planning control anyway. An application would be needed if there was commercial activity at the site, and clearly we would be able to take enforcement action if there was commercial activity at the site in the absence of any planning permission. So I don't think a condition is necessary in that respect.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Goodrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to clarify there is fenestration at either end of the proposed extension. Does it in any way have the capacity to overlook the Velux window in Missenden House? Because there's a Velux in the roof.
I would think the angles are very, very oblique. I think the Velux window is on the street-facing roof slope, and the rear window in the back of what would be the extension is facing the other direction.
But is it further away? Sorry, I just want to be clear that there's no chance that you can see in through the Velux.
If you look at page 303, Chairman, which is a block plan, you can see the rear corner of the extension, and on the neighbouring profile of the adjacent building, Missenden House, there's the profile of the single-storey bit, and there's a Velux in there. If you can see it, it's shown as a pale square. That's pretty much parallel with the corner of the extension, so any window in that extension, I can't believe you'd see out of it into the Velux. Yeah, I mean the angle would be virtually parallel.
Any more questions? I think it's Councillor Goodrick's award. Do you wish to speak to it?
It is my ward, Chairman. Yes, thank you. I will speak. It's always a really difficult situation when you have neighbours who fall out over changes to buildings. I have looked very carefully at this. I'm satisfied, given the positioning of the extension, that there will be no overlooking into the bungalow the bungalow part of Missenden House, and whilst it will move it slightly nearer, it is still within the boundary of the property itself, and there is a hedge separating them, and that hedge seems to be quite a tall hedge. So I am comfortable with the officer's recommendation for approval, and I'll so move, Chairman.
Do you want to include in that proposal the condition that we talked about the hedges that the neighbour asked for?
If the officers feel it's appropriate, then we can put the condition regarding hedges in.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dockerer. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Dockerer? Does anybody wish to speak to the debate? In that case, can we go straight to the vote? Can we call out the names, please, Gary?
Thank you, Chairman. This is for approval with the added condition relating to the hedgerow. Councillor Andrews?
For, Chair.
Councillor Brackstone? For. Councillor Dockra? For. Councillor Goodrick? For. Councillor Graham?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
Councillor Ryby?
For.
Councillor Windris?
For.
That's unanimous, 8 votes to 0, Chairman.
Good. Can we go on to the, I think it's the final application, if I can find the page. It's 305, is it? So it is. Change of use of buildings and agricultural land to equestrian use to allow the establishment of a commercial livery yard to include erection of a block of 7 number stables, formation of a 60 metre by 40 metre outdoor equestrian arena with training, mirrors, installation of 1 number partially covered circular horse walker, formation of 3 number covered winter turnout areas and tack room, feed store with storage area above in an existing agricultural store or barn, the erection of a lean-to adjoining the existing stable block to create a covered wash or dry area for horses, and the addition of equestrian use to the existing agricultural use of the land redlined in the appendix to the application. And it's in relation to the courtyard at Middle Farm at Main Street, Sproxton. Who's going to speak to this, please?
I believe it's Alan on the line again, Chairman.
Alan, are you there?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Can you speak, please?
Ellie, would it be possible to bring up the aerial photo for this one just before I present the item? The first slide, if possible. Thank you. Yes, so item 13 is an application that's subject to 3 objections from local residents and is therefore reported to Planning Committee for determination. Just to highlight a couple of updates since the publication of the report. The first one relates to the consultation section on the first page of the report for this item. The North Yorkshire branch of CPRE, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, have confirmed that the further information from the applicant, as referred to in the report, along with the recommended conditions, alleviate their concerns. The other update relates to condition number 10 and a minor adjustment to the wording of that condition. It's proposed that the wording is changed to refer to a plan included in the further supporting information which indicates the parts of the site where no new fencing would be permitted. So, for example, the yard and the paddocks to the south. It also confirms that a new stop-proof fence would be erected on the inside of the hedgerow on the southern boundary. The reason for that minor adjustment is that the red line application site actually includes the northern part of the farm, which includes the actual dwelling, the applicant's dwelling. So it's just to remove that part of the site, the domestic curtilage, so that they can still benefit from those permitted development rights. So in terms of the application as published and the Officer of Appraisal, the principle of the development is supported by planning policy in relation to farm diversification, rural economic activity and employment, and would make use of an existing yard and buildings. No objections have been raised by any consultees, and taking account of the Parish Council response and the representations received, there is overall support for the development within the village. It is evident that the main concern of the 3 objectors is the highways impact. It is important to note that the large-scale commercial agricultural contractor, which previously operated at the site, has now ceased. And in comparison, the vehicle movements of the proposed livery would be much reduced in terms of the size of vehicles involved and the number of vehicles. All the land and buildings within the site are accounted for, as shown on the site plans, in the sense that the development is self-limiting. So we are aware of what's proposed for each of the existing and proposed buildings. In terms of the concerns which request limits on the number of horses and the number of stables, it is important to note that given the size of the yard and existing farm buildings, the site would support a large commercial agricultural use, which is a realistic fallback position, which wouldn't require planning permission and would not be limited in terms of the number and size of agricultural vehicles. It has also been stated that the permission would be limitless, but the view is not shared by officers who have negotiated with the applicant to agree the proposed schedule of conditions. Those conditions reflect the further supporting information provided by the applicant's agent. It's considered that the recommendation strikes a balance on being sufficiently restrictive but not overly prescriptive, so not to allow any flexibility in the operation of the delivery. The report sets out how the design incorporates appropriate and proportionate mitigation, which limits the impact, and the recommendation also sets out the conditions deemed necessary to reasonably control the use and appearance of the land and buildings. In conclusion, it is considered that, subject to the proposed measures to minimise the impacts of the development, the proposal is a compatible land use and appropriate within the designated landscape. The highway's impact would be minimal, and the use would not result in unacceptable impacts on the living conditions of occupants of neighbouring buildings. It is therefore recommended that permission is granted subject to the 10 conditions as listed in the report, taking account of the amendments to condition 10 as referred to earlier. So in terms of the presentation slides, there's a number of photos and aerial photos of the application site. So the first slide that is currently on screen does highlight the position of the site. It's within the open countryside, within the area of outstanding natural beauty. It occupies a central position on the southern side of the village. Access is gained off the village street, which links to the B1257 on to the west of Sproxton. The application site is an existing farmyard, which contains a variety of modern steel-framed agricultural buildings, and also 3 existing stables are on site. The application site also includes the grazing paddocks, which extend down the slope to the south of the application site. As mentioned, the site was previously used by a large-scale commercial contract farming enterprise. If we can just move on to the next slide, please, Ellie. So this is a close-up of the farmyard with those annotations highlight the proposed use of existing buildings. So working clockwise at the northern end of the farmyard, the large buildings, they're confirmed as being storage buildings ancillary to the proposed use, and that's referred to in one of the conditions. In the northeast corner, there's an existing building which would be an isolation area, which is for disease prevention, which would allow horses to be kept in this area. The long building along the eastern boundary would be converted to provide a covered turnout area, tack room and feed store. To the south of that building, a circular horse walker would be constructed, and to the west of the horse walker, the outdoor arena, the 60 by 40 metre arena would be constructed where that hedgerow runs east to west, which would result in the loss of that hedgerow. Replacement planting is proposed on the western and southern sides of that arena. To the north of the arena, the new stable block would be constructed, and that would contain 7 stables. And then the other part of the development is the proposed lean-to extension, which would provide a covered wash and dry area adjacent to the existing stables. So that would be constructed against the southern elevation of what would be the storage building. So if we can move on to the next photo, please. So this is taken from the village street facing south along the access road, which leads to the yard. The next slide is the visibility at this part of the village. So this is facing east down the village, and the next slide is facing west up the village, so that's facing towards the B1257. And the next photo, please. So this is further within the site along the access road. This is facing where the entrance to the yard is. If we can move on to the next slide, please. This is facing south across the yard. So the existing buildings, modern steel frame buildings here. these are the ones that would be converted as part of the application. The next slide, please. So this is panning round to the building on the western side of the farmyard. So this is one of the buildings that would be limited by condition to storage use only. And then the next slide is facing back towards the northeast corner of the site. So these buildings on the left-hand side of that photo would be limited to storage use, and the open-sided building on the right-hand side, that is the isolation area to prevent disease. Next slide, please. So this is taken from a position where the arena would be constructed, facing towards the eastern side of the application site. So this building shown in the photo, this would be converted to provide the tack room and storage, and also a covered turnout area for horses during winter months or poor weather. Next slide, please. This is the southeast corner of the yard. So to the south of the building that was in the previous photo, this is the position of the where the circular horse walk would be constructed. And just moving on to the next slide, please. This is facing north across the farmyard. This shows the existing stable block, and to the right-hand side, where there's that open area, the lean-to would be constructed to provide the covered wash and dry area. Then the next photo just pans round to the west, and this is facing the boundary where the proposed stable block would be constructed. Next slide, please. And this is facing south across the yard. So the hedgerow, the long hedgerow on the right-hand side of that photo is the hedge that would be removed. In fact, both hedgerows shown on that photo would be removed to allow for the construction of the outdoor arena. So the next photo pans round to the left of the previous photo. So this is facing the access into the paddocks to the south of the yard. And the next photo is taken from the entrance to the paddocks, so showing the eastern boundary of the application site. And you can see the existing field planting, the boundary planting, and the next series of photos just pan round across that part of the application site. So there are conditions relevant to this part of the application site, and it addresses the concerns. They aim to address the concerns raised by the AUMB manager and CPRE and the objectors in terms of the position of field shelters and means of enclosure and boundary treatments, so that there are specific conditions to ensure that the paraphernalia in these fields can be restricted to only those that are required. Panning round, the next photo pans further round, facing towards the western side of the site. And again, the next photo just facing towards the position of the proposed arena. Next photo, please. I think this is the last photo in the presentation. This is taken from further down the field, facing back up towards the yard. So just to illustrate the change in level, also showing the existing planting, which would be removed, but would be replaced, and the replacement would be secured by condition. So I believe that concludes the photos. Yep, thank you, Chair. I believe there's some speakers on this item as well.
Thank you. There are some speakers. First of all, Mr. George Skinner from the parish from the parish council. Are you there, Mr. Skinner?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Would you like to make your speech, please? You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm George Skinner. I'm chairman of Sproxton Parish Meeting, and I've been a Sproxton resident for more than 30 years. Throughout this planning process, the applicants have proactively sought to involve the village in their development plans, listened to any concerns, and kept everyone regularly informed of any updates. They invited residents to attend an open yard visit to see where the proposed development was to take place, providing photos and an opportunity to ask questions. At a parish meeting on the 14th of June 21, held to discuss this planning application, the overwhelming majority voted in support of the application. The site has for a number of years and until very recently been a base for a large-scale agricultural contracting business with machinery sheds and storage of hay and straw bales. Frequent daily traffic included HGVs, tractors, trailers, etc. Overall, there will be a reduction in traffic from this new development. The proposal for change to equestrian use and the establishment of a small commercial livery yard will be in keeping with this rural village and at an appropriate scale for its location. Commercial does not have to mean large. The scale of this enterprise can, as been pointed out by the applicant and the planning officer, be limited by condition. The additional supporting statement submitted by the applicant addresses the concerns raised at the village meeting by a small number of residents, and the imposition of the conditions proposed would be sensible. These conditions would ensure that the new enterprise would have less impact on residential amenity than the former one. The development would have no impact on the street scene, and the landscape plan would ensure the integrity of the AONB is maintained and enhanced with a net biodiversity gain. Concerns raised at the meeting about the visual impact on the surrounding area have been carefully addressed in the additional supporting statement. Screening from hedges and existing agricultural buildings, as well as the topography of the site, all help towards ensuring no or minimal impact. Highway safety is always a significant concern to Sproxton residents. The village street is shared by vehicles, pedestrians and horse riders. The small scale of the proposal, limited by conditions, would have no significant impact on highway safety. The development traffic could be safely accommodated by the current highway and bridleway. This will be considerably less than the recent significant agricultural contract business traffic to and from the farm site, some of which occurred understandably on social hours. This view is supported by NYCC highways. In conclusion, this application is just the sort of low-key rural diversification that should be supported. It is entirely in keeping with its location within our village. With the conditions proposed, it would be a valuable addition to equine provision in the area without detracting and in some respects enhancing the residential amenity enjoyed by residents and visitors. Please follow the planning officer's recommendation and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Skidder. We now have the objector, Simon Welford. Are you there, Mr. Welford?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You have 3 minutes, Mr. Welford.
Are you hearing me well? I'm hearing an echo.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, our property at Middle Farm is the immediate neighbour to the right of the proposed planning application at Middle Farm Courtyard, and we've lived here for 14 years. We're not against the planning application for a change of use to a livery. As you've pointed out yourselves, it makes good sense from its current use, nor are we against the construction of a menage. But what we are concerned about is what we still see as the limitless nature of the application as presented. We've seen in the application that the intent is to create a small, high quality, the word boutique livery has been used. And the plan is for 7 new stables plus the existing 3 stables, so 10 stables in total. However, since the application covers the whole of the farm, including all of the land and all of the current buildings, awarding planning application in its current form would lead to the potential large increase in additional stables into the future, as there would be no restrictions once planning has been achieved. For example, additional agricultural barns could be easily converted to American-style stables, housing up to 20 plus horses. If this were to happen, this is where we would start to be concerned. We would see it as the thin end of the wedge. If expansion were to happen to the livery business, this would indeed start to have an adverse impact upon the residential amenity of Sproxton residents. These include, but are not limited to, impact on traffic and highway safety. It would lead to a big increase in traffic to and from the property on a daily basis at all hours, with horse trailers, lorries, suppliers, feed companies, vets, farriers and trainers, etc. And there'd be a significant increase in the number of horses walking through the village, competing with tractors, delivery vehicles and pedestrians. This would lead to congestion and safety issues in what is a narrow village. Members will remember last month you turned down an application for Sproxton Hall based largely upon issues of access. We don't want to see that coming back through this application. There would also be issues.
You have 30 seconds.
There would also be issues of potentially of noise. So we consider that the applicant should be ready to comply with a limitation on the numbers of stables in the future to that in the current plan, 7 + 3 equaling 10. And a further undertaking should be given that there'll be no lighting of the menage and there'll be no competitions held. And these should be made conditions of planning. We're also very concerned about the billboard, the very large mirrors in the arena, 17 9-foot high mirrors on the western side, which is where we live. This will look like a gigantic
Could you
billboard.
wind up, please, Mr. Welford? You've had your 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We believe that the mirrors should be taken out as part of an additional condition to this plan.
Before we go on, next, can we speak to the? Can we ask the agent to speak, Mrs. Sarah Hymas? Are you there?
Hi. Hi. Yes, can hear.
Would you like to make your address?
Yep, certainly. Evening all. I'm Sarah Hymas and I'm the applicant's agent speaking in support of the application. The applicant is an event rider and basically requires the facilities to practice dressage, show jumping and cross country. The 60 by 40 metre arena will enable dressage tests and a full course of show jumps to be practiced. The facilities will enable the provision of quality care, high welfare standards and all-weather training for event horses and for the retraining of ex-race horses from local racing yards. The proposals provide for a commercial livery yard with some stables being rented to others, including a village resident. This will help the applicants pay for their horses and the facilities, as well as provide financial security for the future. Stables will be rented on a full livery basis, which basically means all equestrian tasks will be done by a yard manager on behalf of the horse owners, which are usually busy professionals, usually riding a couple of times a week. This small-scale application is appropriate for the 20-acre site and is in keeping with the village and surrounding AONB. This rural diversification will create a small, sustainable rural business within a thriving local equestrian community. It will create local employment with 1 full-time yard manager and 1 part-time groom. The impact on the village, we believe, will be minimal. Until recently, a large agricultural contracting business operated from the site for several years with frequent daily traffic, including HGVs, tractors, trailers, lorries, etc. This has ceased, and so traffic and noise will be significantly reduced. There may be a few cars each week at different times and occasional horse boxes. Highways have no objections with this development. We believe the design utilises the existing large hardcore yard as well as screening from hedges, trees and large agricultural buildings which are set back from the village street. There is minimal impact on the views across the AONB due to the topography, and the southern field used to show jump in the summer is not visible from Oswald Beacon Bank towards Ampleforth, the village street, public bridleway or Ebor Way. In addition, green silage bales previously stored in the yard are no longer visible. The applicant submitted additional proposals to address the concerns raised on field shelters, fencing, planting, construction materials and use of farm buildings. The conditions in the officer's report reflect the applicant's proposal to minimise any impacts. Broxton Parish Meeting voted overwhelming to support this application, and numerous letters of support were received from local riders and businesses, including farriers, physios, saddle fitters and retirement livery yard. So in conclusion, this development meets all relevant policy criteria in the Rydell Plan and National Planning Policy Framework. The applicants have listened to all concerns and proactively produced conditions which reflect the comments received. These conditions put effective controls in place, limiting the scale of the development appropriately, whilst providing a degree of flexibility necessary to operate the business without continual planning applications. We ask the committee to follow the officer's recommendations of approval subject to the conditions outlined. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go on, Mr. Welford suggested some conditions. Could I have the officer's views in regards to the conditions which Mr. Welford suggested?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've noted down the matters raised. In terms of the reference to the mirrors on the western side of the arena, the applicant has confirmed they would be downward facing, and landscaping is proposed on the southern and western sides of the arena, which would be controlled by condition to limit the visual impact. In terms of external lighting, the applicant doesn't intend to provide flood lighting at the arena, and that's referred to in condition number 6, which also would control any external lighting within the yard and limit it to just that which is necessary for safe movement of pedestrians and vehicles and horses. The reference to, then there's also reference to various matters which go back to the highways impact and the concern about the impact on the village street. And obviously members will be aware of the sensitivities in terms of the nature of the public highway through the village. The reference to a condition to restrict the arena from being used for competitive eventing. The applicant again doesn't propose that and has said that the site doesn't allow for that in terms of the size of the site that they've got. In addition, the officer view is that should competitions be held at the arena, it would result in a change of use, so it would actually require planning permission in its own right. In terms of the number of stables, a restriction on the total number of stables probably wouldn't, well, the officer view is that it wouldn't be necessary, given that the number of stables doesn't directly relate to the number of horses that could move to and from the site by vehicles. It's possible the arena could be used by horses or owners of horses who aren't stabled at the site. And in addition, the buildings would allow for a degree of flexibility to accommodate horses during any sort of issues of disease prevention. So we don't consider it reasonable to limit it to only 10 stables. Again, this is linking back to the highways impact ultimately, because there isn't an impact from the number of horses per se. So it's really just to go back to the previous use and the use that could be returned to the site without planning permission, which is the intensive agricultural use. And the Highways Authority have no concerns in terms of the proposed vehicle movements and acknowledge that this is an improvement in terms of the highways impact on what was there previously. And then in terms of the concerns about future use and expansion, and how things might evolve in future, that's not something that we can sort of cover by way of planning condition or take into account. So the conditions reflect the proposal as currently shown by the applicant in their application documents.
Thank you. So your view is that as far as is possible, the points covered by the points made by the objector are actually covered by the conditions that you've proposed. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair. In terms of the lighting, that's covered by condition, and the visual impact and landscaping, that's covered by condition. In terms of the restriction to not allow any competitions and a restriction to limit the number of stables, the officer view is that they wouldn't be necessary to be controlled by condition.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Mr. Goodrick.
Thank you, Alan. It's a really good report. I'm just looking at the conditions. I note in condition 7 that there shall be no more than 3 temporary wooden field shelters permitted at the site within the land in red. Can we just beef that up to say the maximum size of 24 by 12, because anything bigger than that isn't really classed as temporary by the planning inspectorate, so it's just worth putting that in there to beef that condition up. There also doesn't seem to be, and please correct me if I'm wrong, any condition regarding the jumps to be removed from the arena at the end of use, at the end of practice. So if you've got dressage, you wouldn't have jumps, but then if you're doing eventing, you would have show jumps, and they need to be taken away because they're usually fairly brightly coloured to attract the horse's attention, but you wouldn't want them left in the open countryside, and I didn't see anything in the conditions that said that they're to be cleared away at night. Thanks, Alan.
Alan?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goodrick. Yes, in terms of the field shelter condition, I don't think there's...
You've gone on to mute, I'm afraid, Alan. We can't hear you, Alan. We can't hear you, Alan. You're on mute. Alan, we couldn't hear your answer to Councillor Goodrick, I'm afraid. I think the technical people have adjusted the machinery, so we should be able to hear you now. Can you try?
Yes, I can hear you now, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Sorry about this.
Okay. So the question, Councillor Goodrick question, I'm trying to recall where I was in my answer now.
Alan, if it helps, I don't think we really heard a lot of your answer. We were discussing the size of the temporary field shelters and the paraphernalia that goes with show jumps.
Yes, okay, thank you, Councillor Goodrick. In terms of that condition, the officer view is that I don't expect any issues if we included a maximum dimensions of the field shelters to include that in the condition. We haven't included a specific condition in relation to the jumps. Within the arena itself, the intention would be that the landscaping would provide sufficient screening. Within the paddocks to the south, the applicant has indicated that it would be the southern end, the lower part of the fields, the lower point where they would put the jumps, and they would be removed when they're not in use. So that part of the site is screened due to the topography and existing landscaping in any event.
Thank you, Alan. Are any other questions? Any follow-up questions? In that case, can we go into debate? Does anybody wish to speak? I think it's Councillor Windress's ward. Councillor Windress.
Thank you, Chair. As Alan has just said, the applicant could have a pig farm as it stands at the moment, which wouldn't help the neighbours, I'm sure. So I have no problem with the use being changed to equestrian. It will mean less traffic movements than there were when it was an agricultural contractors. The arena and stable block are as far away from residential properties as possible, and the majority of buildings are existing. So I will move officer recommendation. Thank you.
Is that with the the dimensions added in by Councillor Goodrick? Yeah. So Councillor Goodrick is seconding.
Yes, Chairman, I'll second it. I think it's an appropriate use in the countryside. I think that the village will actually have a reduction in traffic. There's no suggestion of do-it-yourself livery, which is much more intensive with traffic movements. It's all being done on site, so I have no problem seconding this. Thank you, Chairman.
Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Potter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think most of us are rather familiar with Sproxton at the moment. It seems to come up rather regularly. I found it rather interesting to note the significant and conflicting differences between what the speakers had to say. But having listened to all the detail and read the report, I think that this is an appropriate and sympathetic location to put this in. And the thing I most wanted to comment on was how refreshing it is to hear the attention to detail from the applicant, who's been working sympathetically with the community, and that's particularly notable regarding other applications that we've heard tonight. So the conditions seem to be perfectly appropriate, and yeah, I've no problem supporting this one. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak? In that case, can we get the officer's recommendation has been proposed and seconded with a slight alteration in regard to condition 7, I think it was. Can we go to the vote, please?
Okay, Councillor Andrews.
For.
Councillor Brackstone. Councillor Dockwra. Councillor Goodrick. Councillor Graham.
For.
Councillor Potter. Councillor Ryby.
For.
Councillor Windrus.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman. 8 votes to 0.
So that's the applications. The next item is the appointment of a tree preservation working group. Would Gary like to speak to this? It's item 14. I think it's just a matter of selecting a certain number of us, isn't it?
We actually have got a likely item for a future meeting of this group, so we do need to appoint officers who would wish to be on that group. I think we have to have at least 3 people attend the group for it to be quorate. So I don't think there's any limitation necessarily on the numbers of people who would wish to put themselves forward to be on it. That's what we do need to do, so to make sure that we've got enough members. So any members who would wish to be willing volunteers to be on the Tree Preservation Order Working Group, that would be wonderful.
So Chairman and Vice Chairman? Yes, Chairman and Vice Chairman.
I'm conscious we haven't got quite a few regulars here tonight, unfortunately, but very often Councillor Hope has been on that group, but of course he's not here tonight. So,
how about?
Yes, Councillor Cleary has been. Yeah.
Councillor Cleary, Councillor Windrus. Yeah, but the trouble is you're not on the committee, Tony, are you? So.
Well, I mean, obviously we've had other members who aren't here tonight who've been regulars on that meeting, but I'm just a bit nervous about nominating them in their absence. It's always dangerous to miss a meeting, isn't it? But we could always record their nomination. They don't necessarily have to attend, but I think for the Tree Preservation Order Working Group, when it does meet, we need at least 3 members. So I think if we've got those 5, then I think that should give us enough to go with.
That's fine, then. That's agreed,
yeah,
then.
Okay.
Any other business? And then the list of applications determined under delegated powers. Does anybody have any questions to ask in regard to those? No. In that case, I think. I don't think there is an appeal on this. So in that case, I declare the meeting closed.